Hello, Internet. Gino, that Pinguino Griecco here again with another episode of Deep Listens, and it's time to start talking about Final Fantasy again. There's not really a good, fun name for Final Fantasy XII. We've gotten good ones out of 9, 10, 13. 12 is a weird number. If someone has a good idea for a 12-themed thing, let me know. But for now, maybe I'll come up with it in post, and then it'll all make sense. But since we're talking about Final Fantasy XII, that means I am joined once again by Chris ZombiePie REDACTED, the Final Fanatic.
Hey, everybody.
Yep.
We had a 2-month break, and I would say my batteries are recharged for the purposes of playing a Final Fantasy game.
Well, we played 13, which is officially our worst Final Fantasy game. The worst Final Fantasy game. Not ours.
The bar is low.
It's the
also.
worst. So it can only go up from here, I would assume.
Hopefully.
And we also have a special guest as well.
Hello.
We have Matt Rorie of Giantbomb and Screen fame joining us.
Welcome to me.
Excellent. So, Final Fantasy XII. This was a GameSpot review. Were you still around at GameSpot at the time this game was running?
2006, I definitely was. I definitely played it. I don't think I did a game guide for it, which was my job at GameSpot at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there a mad game guide from one Matthew Rorie that we somehow missed on the internet?
I know that Kevin Van Ord did the review, but I wasn't sure if the boss of bosses himself let us know how to defeat the Fire Mare.
The bigger ones for some of these Japanese RPGs were handled by freelancers, but I'm not sure we even bothered to do some of this stuff. I
also seem to recall that, like, some of the guides, you published them using the Japanese versions of these games. Like, there were some times where, like, the screenshots were the rough cuts of the Japanese versions, but alas.
It's hard for me to remember because I did not do anything. They would take somebody a month, and back in the day, the ultimate guides from Japan were kind of immediately translated onto GameFAQs. So I think for the most part, we let GameFAQs people handle and they would do it for free. We own the GameFAQs. For stuff like this, that would take me a month to do. I just said, hey, we all just kind of agreed to kind of utilize our resources in a different manner.
Well, I mean, it makes total sense. And as someone who owns the guidebook for this game, because I, at this stage of my life, was just getting every Final Fantasy thing and the guidebook from GameStop, just like pre-ordering them. I have the limited edition one. And let me tell you, the cover of that guidebook is just Ash, the main, like, this character, just winking at you. And having a lady winking at you on your guidebook when you're, like, 13... My parents didn't love it. I'll say that much.
Yeah, if you've ever been to Japan, though, I don't know how many of them came over here, but the ultimate guides for the FF games were usually I think there were usually 2 editions for each one.
Yep. They
They were just the phone book size. They were massive. They're smaller than our guidebooks were here from Versus or Prima, but they were just dense as shit. And I write. We're allowed to curse in this, I assume.
Go right ahead.
Okay.
Cursing is good. It is
curse
approved.
as much as you want.
So when I've written many game guides in my time, and I'm very voluble, very wordy person, but the Japanese versions were, and honestly, I'm sure you've talked about it before, these Final Fantasy games have secrets that no reasonable person would be expected to be able to discover on their own. So I really suspect that Square Enix put in a lot of kind of obscure stuff just for the sake of selling some game guides. So, it's one of those things where before GameFAQs, I'm not sure how people figured stuff out, but all the FF game guides were pretty much mandatory if you wanted to get everything.
I also seem to recall that Final Fantasy game guides used to have like art and art from Square that you couldn't find or get anywhere else, and so that's part of the reason why they became the massive collector items that they've now become.
Very cozy relationship, I'm sure, between Square and all their publishers.
Yeah, and they tended to have posters and charts and things. Like a lot of the elements in the game systems, like the sphere grid and stuff like that, they tend to be fairly large, and kind of taking it all in when you're using their UI can be a little tough. But if you have a nice handy chart, makes sense.
Yeah.
So the game guides are super good. Yeah, I actually have the Final Fantasy IX Ultimania.
The Final Fantasy IX guide where you have to go to the website?
I have the 9 one from Japan. I was going to get the 8 and the 9 one, but they were like, I think they were like 4,000 yen a pop. They were not cheap, and so I was not going to drop, $100 on 2 guidebooks for games that had come out like 15 years before.
And you can't. I was assuming you can't read Japanese.
I can, but very slowly.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I'm gonna read 1 page a day, and that'll help me improve my Japanese. But they don't. I don't think they even use furigana in that one. And
and all the weird Final Fantasy terms probably don't help. The fact that all this stuff is probably not really easily translatable.
Those are actually easier because they use katakana for those, so I can tell that it's a made up fake word. It's when they use kanji and they don't use furigana because it's dense as hell. So like just translating the first paragraph of Zidane description, which is like the first thing in the book, took me like an hour. I was like, well, I guess one day, maybe.
Big tail.
I'll find out the secrets in this game that no one else has bothered to record, and then I'll know the truth. But that is not the game we're here to talk about today. Today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XII, which is an interesting game. It was the last PS2 Final Fantasy. I would say it was the last great one, or good one, at least from my memory.
Again, I don't like 13. You keep saying these things, Gino, and as much as you hate the MMORPGs...
Oh, yeah, I mean, the
MMORPG community keeps writing us letters saying, hey, man, stop dismissing 11 and 14.
I played 11. 11's good, but I had to talk to people, and that, stranger danger, it got me to stop playing that game. And 14, I haven't gotten into it, but one day we will, and you won't know when we're doing it because we'll be incognito first because we don't want you to ruin the experience by being nice to us.
Yeah, 14's good. I've played up to level 20 or 30. I'm obviously more of a WoW person, but 14 is well worth checking out.
One day soon.
Yeah.
I know that the last time I went to PAX, they gave us lanyards with free trials, so we will eventually get to that game. But one thing to just discuss before we really start talking about 12, we are playing different versions of 12. I am playing the actual PS2 version, and you guys are both playing the PC re-release, correct?
Correct. I played the original PS2 version, but Zodiac Age was I believe that came out. So this is based on the Japanese.
There's the International Edition, and then there's the Zodiac Age, and the International Edition was kind of like a re-release of Final Fantasy XII in Japan only.
They've done that before with other titles. I believe 10 had an international.
They did it with 10 with international, but the weird thing about the 10 version when I looked it up is that it actually just had a bunch of weird oddities, which for English-speaking audiences you only can get if you buy the HD remaster, which you shouldn't play them because they're fucking horrible.
Oh, I like the Vita version of that game.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that the version of the game, but like all of the weird trappings that were released in the international version of Final Fantasy X, like Final Fantasy X-2, The Last Mission, or Final Fantasy X Will, which is an audio drama book, or Final Fantasy X, here's the cutscene that explains how they go from Final Fantasy X to X-2. Like all of that weirdness, other than the easier to use sphere grid, is just completely pointless.
The only thing I wanted to do when I got the remaster, and this was immediately a pipe dream, I told myself I was going to play and farm and get to Penance, which was the ultimate end boss of that international HD remaster game. But I failed to impress upon myself how much time and work it takes just to get the gear you need to get to the point where you can get through the monster arena and get to the end boss. Not the end boss of the game. This is a wholly separate optional thing, but it's so complicated and so long-winded that I gave up, which is how I attack most problems that face me.
Yeah, these are weird games.
Anyways, Final Fantasy XII, we are playing 2 different versions. I have, like I said, I played the original PS2, and this, I was really pleased when this came out for PC, the Zodiac Age. It's an okay port, but there are pretty substantial differences between the 2 games, which I guess we want to talk about now?
Yeah. So the 2
first
different
off,
games...
Gino,
go right ahead.
No, you have to do the intro that people need to send us emails and stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yep. So just a reminder, if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so at DeepListensPod on Twitter, deeplistens.libsyn.com. You can hit up our comment section, which maybe works now.
Hopefully.
I hope. Whatever.
Maybe all these
but this one always
self-accused
works. This one always works.
People you say that are my alternate accounts that you keep accusing me of because they keep asking questions about me.
Well, deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com always works, so use that. We get emails there sometimes. Let me just make sure that we don't have any Final Fantasy-related emails, because I'm pretty sure we don't. But let me just check real quick. Last time I checked, we didn't. Animal Facts, nope, that's not it.
Wasn't there a Final Fantasy XIII question?
No, Ape Escape. Oh, we did get... Did I read you the Ape Escape email?
No.
I feel like you should... You might get a kick out of this. So we recorded an Ape Escape 2 episode, and we got 2 different timelines articulated about Ape Escape. One of them was primarily... It seemed like it was pretty straightforward
factual?
About Ape Escape.
Okay.
Yeah, it seemed pretty factual. Then we also got one that went... the continuing plot of the Ape Escape series... Hello, Deep Listens gang. Glad to hear you covered Ape Escape, a series I have heard of before. I thought I could chime in on the future games a bit, but at least as far as the plot goes, I'm definitely an expert on the subject. So after the events of Ape Escape 2, Spectre eventually escapes the clutches of Spike and humanity to return to his moon base, where he spends the next few centuries researching life, extending technology, eventually replacing most of his form with biomechanical components. His research on monkeys continues as well. There's actually a split here in the timeline, both of which exclude the non-canon Ape Escape 3. In the Prime timeline, Spectre's continued primatology leads him to developing highly specialized subspecies of monkeys, a la the Freaky Monkey 5. These highly specialized monkeys are given increasingly important tasks, including the production of food for the moon colony and the sustenance of the moon's orbit, as it steadily decayed over thousands of years. Over time, the scientists at his lunar facility bore families and colonized the moon in full and construct a Dyson sphere around it to protect it from the people left on Earth. The monkeys became drunk with power, and their slapstick antics from the Ape Escape duology transform over time into the issuance of insane demands of the lunar humans, who now worship them as deities. This cycle will be thrown into chaos when the 2 humans born from Earth, which eventually becomes known as Pulse, are cast into the lunar Dyson environment, which is colloquially referred to as Cocoon, and become involved in a kind of sort of freedom fighters who try to save a crystal girl from an evil monkey Pope while whining over an entirely voluntary sacrifice of Hope's mother. This game, Ape Escape 4, Final Fantasy XIII, leads to 2 sequels, Ape Escape 4-2, Final Fantasy XIII 2, and Ape Escape Venom, Lightning Returns, Final Fantasy XIII 3, where it is revealed that Lightning is a distant descendant of Spike.
Please tell me it stops.
No, there's also another timeline that is also canon. In the second timeline, the games get much more interested in the monkeys turning into various pop culture figures and existing in their own sort of pocket dimensions. These games make up the Nort line and include the hit titles Ape Escape Nort 1, Kingdom Hearts, Ape Escape Nort 1.27, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Monkeys, Ape Escape Nort 2.0 V1, Kingdom Hearts 2, Ape Escape Nort 358 over 2 Monkeys, a Kingdom Hearts story, Ape Escape Nort 2.76 Urs, Kingdom Hearts Monkey Drop Distance, and Ape Escape Nort X, Kingdom Hearts Recoded, based on a phone game. And, of course, the long-awaited Kingdom Hearts 3, Ape Escape 5, called Ape Escape 5, Kingdom Hearts 3 outside of Japan. That comes to us from Jeff Root. I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Oh, God. Well, I guess this is good enough time for me to interrupt my own thing. I'm bringing back an old segment.
What?
So
this is highly irregular.
Some of our established listeners might know that occasionally I do a food review on the podcast.
I wouldn't call it a review. I would call it self-harm via food.
But I saw something at my local Walmart that I had to pick up and then immediately thought I could probably do something with this on the podcast. So I was doing my regular groceries, and I saw that they were still carrying the reissued version of the Pepsi Crystals. What? So I bought a Pepsi Crystal.
Wait. Okay, when you say this is Crystal Pepsi, not Pepsi Crystals, like some sort of
No, it's Crystal Pepsi. It's clear cola.
Okay, that's not as cool.
It's still a bit of self-harm because when I look at the nutritional label for this, everyone here can attest that the FDA recommends anywhere between 25 to 30 grams of sugar for your daily allowance. But one bottle of Crystal Pepsi has 69 grams of sugar.
Oh, no.
And I'm not going to drink this entire thing because I think it would
Please
actually
don't.
kill me. But down goes the dynamite. Let's try this.
This is way better. I thought you were going to eat another Vienna sausage. Rory, I don't know if you're familiar, but in the past he's eaten Vienna sausages. He has drank Vienna sausage juice. That was for the children.
Yeah.
But it gave him food poisoning, and that wasn't fun.
Well, I'm sampling a fine Modelo. We had a barbecue here last week, and
That's not that great.
I bet not. Any clear soda is just,
It doesn't have the
antithetical to
Pepsi flavor, which is weird
which
because
is well
it
known
says
and
it's
loved.
still cola.
Describe to me how it feels in your mouth.
So imagine like drinking a 7-Up, but it tastes like a watered down version of a cola, like a really watered down version of the cola.
All right, sorry, give me 1 second. My cat is wanting to get up on my lap. Keep talking. I'll be back.
And
Go right ahead.
This cola doesn't. It tastes like a less carbonated version of Pepsi. And somehow it has more sugar than a normal Pepsi, and yet it has more sugar than a Pepsi. It doesn't taste like it. It tastes like you're drinking a very flat, and kind of it. Does this have aspartame? Because it sure tastes like it.
Aspartame versus aspartame. Is there a pronunciation official? Because I've always looked at that word and thought it was aspartame.
No, they're using high fructose corn syrup. So
I've always heard it as aspartame personally, but aspartame sounds way cooler.
I know.
Yeah, it does. It's a chemical compound that has no impact on human health.
I feel like,
according to the American Aspartame Convention.
No, that's from the science. There's no scientific evidence that aspartame has negative health impacts.
I guess we're never going to get to the bottom of the pronunciation of this.
No, this is bad. You shouldn't buy this. If you want a clear cola that tastes less of a cola and somehow has 3 times the sugar but doesn't taste like it, then I guess go get a Crystal Pepsi.
My health improved immeasurably when I cut soda out entirely.
Yeah, this is the first soda I've had in like 3 years. But again, taking the risks. Maybe one of these days, Gino, I'll have you task me with finding a vegetable and I'll eat a vegetable on the podcast. But
I've tried.
Alas, today is not the day.
Alas, today it's you having terrible things. So
here in California, we have easy access to Mexican Coke, which is kind of the one thing that I will splurge on. Full sugar, no HFCS or anything like that. It's the one thing that I will have once a week or so.
The one thing I would say about that, because I live in San Jose, is I took because I work in a school, we took the kids to the Apple headquarters just as kind of like a field trip. And what kind of drove me crazy is when we went there, the person who was giving the guide is like, well, we have all-natural, locally sourced soda that uses real sugar. And these freaking people, are totally convinced that because their soda uses sugar, it's somehow a healthy part of their diet. Soda.
Well, it's farm-to-table soda.
It's still soda. It's sugar that 1 cup will have your 3-time daily allowance of sugar intake.
Look, I don't know if you know this, but sugarcane grows in the ground, and nothing's more natural than the ground. So,
anyways, Final Fantasy.
Yep, Final Fantasy XII. So why don't we just start with just some of the differences in the 2 versions of the game, because I feel like that will come up a bunch, or should we just start with the story and then roll into the mechanics?
The first cinematic is a good starting point.
Sure.
So,
all right, the first cinematic. Why don't you set the table?
Okay, the first cinematic is that the world of Final Fantasy XII takes place in the Ivalice universe, the universe set forward by the Final Fantasy Tactics series, which also includes Tactics Advance, which is basically Final Fantasy Tactics 2, and now we have Final Fantasy XII, and what would have been that Final Fantasy game that Grin was supposed to make, but alas, that did not come to bear. We are introduced to I forget what it's called. Let me find it. Old Valendinian, the Kingdom of Dalmasca. Man, they really have a way with the names of locations and places. So we're at the Kingdom of Dalmasca, which is now celebrating the marriage between its crown prince and the soon-to-be princess of the Kingdom of Dalmasca. And it's this massive ordeal. We see this very kind of Judeo-Christian style of marriage where everyone's dressed in white and there's flowers in the air and they're pronounced husband and wife, and they look happy and it's a joyous occasion. And then we immediately transition, I should say, kind of smash cut to a war table where we find out that the Kingdom of Dalmasca is being invaded by the Nabodese. Oh, no, wait. Nabodee is the city that fallens, and that's from Nalbina.
Nalbina,
and
sacked.
Nalbina is being invaded by Arcadia, which is a kingdom that's in constant conflict with the other kingdom that we don't see, which is Rosaria. And Dalmasca is kind of in the middle, and so it's kind of like this jockeying of power.
It's like Tibet between China and India.
Yeah, sure. And so they get invaded. Our crown prince, who recently has been married, summons an army to defend this town that's been invaded. They lose. Prince is killed. His knight that's supposed to protect him, that looks like Bash, but I was kind of confused. It's Bash, right?
Bosch.
Sure.
It looks like Bosch.
It's Bosch. Well, as with any game that spends a good amount of money on its CG cutscenes, there's a slight adjustment to like the in-game sprite versus the CG version.
Sure.
And we find out that this has put everyone, like the queen is sad, husband's dead, king of Dalmasca, Lord Ramanos. He's basically forced to sign this peace treaty. And that's where we pick up in the first playable segment of the game. We control a young, plucky soldier.
He signs the peace treaty, and then is immediately killed, right?
Yes,
he is going to sign it. He's going to sign a peace treaty, and before he can sign it, he is murdered by presumably Bosch. And you control this character Rex, who's a soldier in this troop. At first, he's following Bosch, and he's going to basically protect the king. They think that someone is going to ruin this basically signing ceremony and assassinate the king. And by the time you get there, the king is already dead, and Bosch turns on you and kills you. You get split up, and then when you eventually reconnect, you see Bosch kind of standing over the murdered body of the king and a bunch of guardsmen, and then he sticks you, and Rex is presumably killed as well.
Now, two things that I have to say. First thing is this introductory cutscene is maybe from the introductory swooping shot of the city or kingdom to like the first narration from the storybook is a solid 10 minutes, would you say? It's not super long for like a Final Fantasy introductory cinematic, but hot damn, does it get a lot of storytelling done in just a short amount of time. It's a
they
lot.
set the table.
You're seeing like 18 different primary characters, like 90% of whom get killed, and you're introduced to like 4 or 5 locations, and it's a lot.
A lot of proper nouns.
A lot for 10 minutes, that first 10 minutes. And I guess where I start to push back in terms of the storytelling, or at least the narrative of the game, is our first real scene where we control our characters doesn't really build upon any of this lore or mythology. Like the idea that there's this monolithic country that is invading, and then there's like this conflict, the devastation of this war. You got all of these plot beats like pulling at you from different directions, and that first level builds upon none of those plot beats.
Go kill some rats.
Yeah, exactly. We're in the desert.
You mean after you control Rex, after the tutorial? Yes, I would say yes. Though I will say the first cutscenes, they do a really good job early on of setting how warfare works in Ivalice and making it seem like for as fantasy-ass as much of the fighting is, they make it seem gritty in a way that I appreciate. Like the air superiority that's going on in some of these battles, and like these shields, like mages casting a giant shield spell, and you see a bunch of like soldiers fighting their way up to the mages to stick them so that these gigantic airships can just drop bombs on this town. It has a feel to it and a look to it that seems like the combat actually has consequences, and there's a level of, I don't know, it almost of realism to the violence.
I don't know. I feel like it's so anachronistic that it's unable to convey a real clear or cohesive art style or message. Like, you have these characters wielding these knives and swords and daggers, and yet here are these like flying platforms. It feels like Square couldn't make up its mind if it wanted to go high fantasy or science fiction in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's trying to blend them, but maybe it's just there's a scene later on where I think it works better. Just the notion that Dalmasca and the country is kind of stuck between Arcadia and, what was the second? Rosaria?
Rosaria.
These countries that are in between just have no chance in these battles. And there's just a level of technological disparity between these countries that there's no reason they should be at war. Like, it's not a fair fight. They can be at war, but one side is just going to roll them. And I think it's particularly brutal. How they depict it, because the thing that kind of sways the battles for Arcadia is they have an air force, and Dalmasca basically doesn't. So you're seeing these people fighting on the ground and doing all they can to protect themselves and protect their country, but they're getting bombed from above and can do nothing about it. So it's a foregone conclusion that it's just going to be slaughter, and that's something that I think since like Final Fantasy IX basically has not been a major theme in these games, kind of depicting warfare between two unequal powers. And I always get a kick out of it when these games try to approach this.
Yeah, it's a pretty common theme. 15 is the same way. 15 has a very similar intro where you leave your village or leave your nation and see it invaded again. 2, I think, or 4 here in the States has a lot of that kind of overwhelming military force doing bad shit. They're never on the right side of the storyline in the end, no matter what you think. It's another one of those common themes of FF.
Yeah, and I think that it definitely works in this game. And man, you are totally right. And as soon as this ends, you then jump cut to Vaughn 2 years later.
Killing rats in a sewer.
Yep.
And then also, like, the other big problem I have is that the production values of this game are either amazing or kind of like stuck in a previous generation. I get that the storybook sequences where the old guy is narrating his journal are meant to be a callback to Final Fantasy Tactics because it is set in Ivalice, but they feel so out of place when you have these Magnus, like these huge sweeping CG cutscenes, and even when you're playing the game in-game, when you have these vista shots that are absolutely gorgeous, and then just to have like these kind of like storybook moments where you're looking at like static images with static text with just this guy narrating it, it feels very low rent, and it feels anachronistic with the production values of the rest of the game. Like, they couldn't give us like anything like in-game context. Like, me looking at a map of like Arcadia and Rosaria, I don't know what to make of that because I still don't know what these locations mean. And just looking at this, like those, and the game uses those storybook moments a lot in the first chapter with just this old guy you've never met before. Well, you do meet him. I will take that back. But just narrating for like up to 5 minutes talking about these characters that you really don't have a lot of connection to, not a lot of not lacking a point of reference. And so those I felt like were a waste. It's like when Final Fantasy games have like flashbacks in the first chapter when you don't even know who any of these characters are. It's like, well, great. I guess this makes sense when I play the game a second time.
Yeah.
It's a long build-up, or not, I should say there's a long what I remember about this game, even before I played the Zodiac Age edition, was that the beginning of this game is very, very, very slow. And one of the things maybe to mention mechanically different between the Zodiac Age and the old games is that Zodiac Age, I think even the international version had a speed up button where everything goes twice as fast or 4 times as fast. And honestly, if they hadn't added that into Zodiac Age, I would never have gone through the first 2 hours of this game to get to the good, meaty parts of it, because it is such a bummer of a beginning of the game. Just totally boring. You have no idea who Vaughn is. And honestly, Vaughn, right? Yeah, Vaughn is, as the guy who was on the cover of the box, if I recall, a totally irrelevant character to most of the storyline beats. He's just kind of an observer of everything. He's kind of the everyman character if the everyman character was one of those typical Final Fantasy 13-year-old boys who are almost always super annoying.
But he's not even a good everyman because one, like, he doesn't, like, the thing, a lot of people hate Titus. And at least with Titus serves a role. Yeah. Titus is a fish-out-of-water character in an alien world that helps build the world and ground your perspective in terms of what you're looking at and what you can expect to see and fight in this environment by having those conversations. Vaughn,
he's there to ask questions.
He's there to ask questions that you legitimately want to ask and have the answer to. Vaughn just waltzes into a scene, says Vaughn stuff, and then moves on. And so he's not a fish-out-of-water character, so he doesn't build context. He has a very ambiguous connection with the overall narrative that you really have. Here's this giant war, like this society has been destroyed, it's been leveled, and they're in the process of rebuilding. Yeah. What does Vaughn have to do with it? We learn he was an orphan during this war, and he's made an orphan because of it. But, like, why is he invested? He doesn't feel invested with this, like, overarching meta-narrative, so why should I feel invested with his story? And, yeah, Vaughn isn't – it's not just that Vaughn is the pretty boy that is indicative of the direction that Square went with their character design. That certainly doesn't help, but it's the fact that he's a misstep both of design and writing.
Yeah, I would say – this game plays at the country level, and the entire opening cutscene, even the opening tutorial, is hinting at global, or at least continental politics being the central focus. These interplays between royal families and armies, and then it jump cuts to 2 years later, you're a street urchin, kind of war orphan.
You're Aladdin. You're basically Aladdin. He looks like Aladdin. He talks like Aladdin.
He steals stuff like Aladdin. He treats the
world like Aladdin. He's Aladdin.
And you're just kind of on the streets running errands for a local shopkeeper, and then eventually you get swept up into a greater story by joining other characters who actually have stakes.
And Vaughn doesn't earn his place within that community, within that network. He just is there.
He is ignored by them.
Thrown into that situation. He doesn't earn it, and neither does he really own his place in that group.
I mean, his job is mostly to hold MacGuffins and then have them taken from him. But that is, we are not up to that point. In the first 2 hours of the game, you kill rats for a local merchant, and then you have to go hunt the rogue tomato. Did everyone enjoy the rogue tomato?
No. No. I just... Would it have killed them to, like, have Vaughn be a character with stakes? Like, would it have killed them to say, like, oh, man, if Vaughn doesn't do this hunt, then he's not going to be able to eat? And then, like, what if, like, Penella was sick and dying and he needs to buy her medicine because, like, the state of the city after this war is dire unless you support the Imperials? Like,
well,
it's this devastated country that's under an occupation, and yet you don't see the impacts of that occupation. Like, people feel like they're inconvenienced, but they're able to have this bustling economy. Like, you go to the bazaar, and it looks like it's business as usual, despite everyone kind of complaining about, like, this oppressive regime. And yet, Vaughn doesn't feel inconvenienced by that repressive regime at any point.
That's not true.
No, he doesn't even mention it in the story other than the few times at the very end of this chapter.
I mean, he runs into Imperials and they, like, shut doors in his face and say that he's not allowed places, and then, like, they threaten violence on people. Like, it's an uneasy piece. It is not the complete, brutal, cartoonish, authoritarian crackdown on the Dalmascan people, but it is an uneasy occupation. Like, there are people who have dominion over basic affairs that were not elected and are not appreciated. And the game makes that clear fairly early on. And the stakes for Vaughn are that his brother was the witness who saw the king get murdered. That is how he is supposed to be tied into the game.
And maybe if Vaughn felt more emotionally invested until when it feels convenient to the story about, like, investigating his brother's murder, I would feel more passionate about what you're saying. But he literally only mentions it, like, near the very end when he gets thrown in prison, and then will eventually see Bosch in prison. It's not like something that he continually brings up, that, like, this is a depressing moment, or this was a massive, like, earth-shattering moment for him, like something that forced a level of introspection you would expect out of someone. It's not a traumatic experience in the way that trauma should be surfaced in a game that with, like, intercontinental politics.
It reminds me a bit of every MMO ever, and this is one of the most MMO-esque single-player RPGs that I've ever played. It has a lot of the trappings of the open world and not, going into a different fighting phase when you're in fights. It definitely seems like it took a lot of inspiration from MMOs. This in Kingdom of Amalur: Reckoning was another one that felt very much like a single-player MMO. And in those kind of games, that you always have an opening cutscene that is like, here's the huge event in the world, and now you go kill rats until you become powerful enough to involve yourself in the greater storyline. And Vaughn does get there in the end. I mean, just for dint of being involved, one of the 6 main characters, his relationship with Bosch after he discovers that Bosch didn't actually kill his brother is a touching overall story, which might not fit into the thing we're talking about today. But he gets there eventually. But every time I start this game, those first 2 hours are just monotonous, and you barely have any abilities to use. You're basically just auto-attacking over and over again.
Well, not even auto-attacking.
Yeah,
you have to select attack for the first few hours, at least if you're playing on the PS2 version. I don't know if they fixed that in Zodiac Age.
You're true. You're correct. The Gambit stuff doesn't open up until later, so yes, you're just hitting attack over and over again. It is a perfect element of, like, Bathos, where you have this grand sweeping storyline that you're reduced to just killing rats. And I don't want to belabor the point, but it's very disappointing. It was disappointing the first time I played the game. Being able to speed up through it really helped a lot here, but it's just a bizarre kind of sinking into the worst parts of MMO or just RPGs.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of the gameplay? So, like you said, it is very MMO focused. Early on, you can only really select attack or steal, and the Gambit system isn't enabled. Luckily, I think it's maybe when you get to the waterway, they start giving you the Gambit system, and once you have the Gambit system, I feel this game becomes playable.
Sure.
Like, the early parts of the game, I think, are actively bad, and I forgot for years how short it is before you get the Gambit system and before the game starts opening up. I thought it was like 4 or 5 hours, but it's really only 1 or 2 before that stuff starts happening. But it kept me from playing this game for a decade because I had such a sour impression of the first few hours.
It's beyond bad. I mean, even in 4, you're playing as this amazing knight. 15, you're a prince. 10, you're this mysterious visitor. Here, you start off as a rat catcher, and maybe that's to humble the player a little bit. But for me, I don't really care about fantasy as a heroic exercise and like identifying with characters. It's not really something that I can be. I can play anything if it's interesting. And Vaughn at the beginning and all throughout the game, he's very much the least interesting character in the story.
Can we also mention that the voice acting in this game? Whew.
Well, in spots. I think there are...
Oh, no, man. I don't know how you feel about these accents in this game, but they're slowly killing me.
I like a lot of them. I like a lot of them despite themselves. I forget who the character, the cat girl is.
Fran. I like Fran.
I like Fran a lot too, but sometimes her accent is tough to deal with. But it's mostly Baltier and Bosch that are just the kind of the classic English, English accent, heroic fantasy stereotype that are great. They do really good work. There are some other ones like the Prince of the Spanish Prince, who just everybody's set to 11 the entire time. There's no. It's either great or infuriating depending on the conversation.
And the Imperial voice actors, the voice actors for the Imperial soldiers, they all sound like they're characters from Monty Python. And it's really hard to take these deep introspective moments about tragedy or trauma when immediately when these characters interact with these Imperials and they sound like they're talking Cockney slang. It's really hard to process those scenes in isolation from all of this kind of like, I don't know if the game's trying to be comedic or if it's trying to remain a consistent tone of like going through social strife, going through this trauma, going through this almost apocalyptic war for these people.
I would say it does, and I only bring this up because I played 15 recently. 15 has way more problems in terms of you being a prince of a country that has been invaded. Your dad's dead. You are in deep peril. The humor in that game is way, way worse and jarring than anything I could really remember in 12. I think 12 is sometimes a little too self-serious, but it for the most part, I feel like 12 avoids the worst of the impulses for humor in FF. FF has a long history of poking jokes and doing weird stuff. But
FF has a long and storied history of tonal inconsistency.
Yeah. Yes. That's true of. I'd say that's true of almost any big, long RPG. So they almost always have to do some kind of comedic relief, and there are games that do it well and games that do it don't. I think for the most part, I would say 12 does a good job of not being too, except for stuff like Kill the Tomatoes and things like that. It does a pretty good job, I think, of keeping on the level.
So I won't sit here and have you mock the Rogue Tomato hunt.
Yeah, the hunts are a whole different thing.
That deeply, deeply meaningful section where Vaughn, after a hard Scrabble day of hunting rats, has to go out and take on some big game, a tomato with legs.
I've been holding this back. But it's worth noting that for me, this is my first time playing Final Fantasy XII.
Yeah, this is my second.
This is absolutely the first time I've played this game, and I kind of once they give you the hunts, I actually didn't mind the first level because there are all of these mechanics and something that appears that eventually I wrapped my mind around, like the license system. I liked being able to try new things in what was ostensibly a really safe and non-confrontational environment where yes, you're right. I'm just clicking attack or steal. But when I have to wrap my mind around is this game turn-based or is it real-time? I guess it doesn't really matter because everything is kind of like it's this just kind of safe place to just grapple the most basic fundamental part of this game, which is attacking the opponent. And
eventually this game will allow you to automate that away, and it becomes real time. And the only things you're really caring about is if your party's dying or if you need to do something specific, like some sort of specific skill.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just let's run up to a trash enemy, attack it till it's dead, navigate your character to another trash enemy. There were multiple times once I got the Gambit system unlocked where I got up, went and got a drink, came back, had killed, my characters had taken care of, a mob of enemies, and everyone's HP was fine, and no input was needed from me.
So we good to start talking a little bit about Gambit system then for a bit?
So let's go to the license board system.
Before we talk about systems, I just have one thing to talk about with the accents.
Okay.
I think the game is trying to do something with the accents, at least in terms of dictating class or explaining class via accent. All of the characters who are in the upper class have some kind of accent, be it British, be it Spanish, different types of affectations. And Vaughn and Penello and the people of the lower class seem to not have any, or at least they have an American accent for the most part. And I don't know if that's what they were going for or if it was coincidence to kind of use the accents as a way of displaying social strata. But it also is really incongruous because people of the upper class, they have accents, but they're not all the same. Like, they all seem to have different accents. And it's not like everyone in Dalmasca has one particular accent. Like, there are some people who have American accents, some people who have British accents. And, you know, maybe it's because Dalmasca, it seems like, became a land where refugees from other countries fled to after Arcadia invaded them. And maybe it's supposed to be more of a melting pot. But I think they're trying to do that with the accents, but it just doesn't – they're just so spotty that it becomes hard to track.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And, you know, again, I hate to chalk it up to Final Fantasy being Final Fantasy, but that's a real Final Fantasy problem to have.
Yeah, I think they're trying to do something good, but it's kind of muddled, and the execution is poor, so it's hard to tell if they're trying
their
something
heart is in
or
the
if it was
right
coincidental.
place.
Yeah, but I can imagine a world where they were going for something big.
I bet this is something, Gino, I bet this is something where, like, the people who are lower class would have, like, a Kansai accent, and then the people who are higher class had, like, a Tokyo accent, and then they would use different parts of Japan to show that.
Yeah, different parts of speech, different phrases, and then we'd know. But unfortunately, they did it in English, and that means they had to use accents. And some of the voice actors can't do them.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem I have is, like, when you watch a character start out with a British accent and then it kind of becomes pseudo-German and then it goes back to being American and then back to British all in one scene.
Yep. So do you want to discuss the license board or the Gambit system first? Because they're the two biggest things. I think the Gambit system, then we can discuss the license board because the license board is actually different between the two versions of the game we played.
So the Gambit system is I know at least one of you have problems with it. I think it's one of the more intriguing, or it's definitely one of the more interesting FF combat system designs across the entire series. So you really, like you mentioned, you don't really have to input too much if you don't want to. As long as you set up your Gambits okay. What I find interesting about the Gambit system is that if you don't, I could definitely see a lot of people hitting this place. There's no, like, automatically make a good Gambit system for newbies. It really does take a lot of work in terms of if then or that statements. It's almost a pseudo-programming tool for your characters.
It is a programming tool.
Yeah.
As someone who's a software developer, getting to this section, and I'm just like, oh, so I'm just creating if-else statements, and then the things higher in the thing have higher priority than others. And then there were moments where I would create, like, Gambits that were – like, had corner cases I hadn't considered, and then I felt like I was debugging my characters, and that was kind of upsetting on a weekend, but that got my characters playing correctly.
Yeah, I mean, you can do stuff. You can easily make a Gambit system where your character does zero, just doesn't attack, doesn't do anything. If you put the wrong thing in the top slot, like, attack this character if the HP equals 100%, that is something you can do. If you don't know that means that as soon as he gets attacked, they will never attack it again because his health has dropped below 100%.
Yeah, there's that too.
All kinds of stuff you can do with it, but when you get the hang of it, and it can take a while, and it definitely gates you through all these points where you don't get the entire every option in the game. And honestly, there are a lot of options that nobody would ever pick. They threw in like 400 different Gambits, I think, or something like that. A lot of them are never going to be relevant to anybody ever. But the fact that you have them all gives you a degree of fluidity to the characters that is kind of unmatched. The flip side of that is all characters eventually, especially in the original game, would be equally powerful, have no clear, distinct roles. Even if they show in the game as a crossbow user or a knight, they, at least on the PS2 version, they were all eventually equally adept at everything, which is one of the big things that the Zodiac Age tries to do with the job system. But the Gambits I just find are endlessly like an intriguing. The pitch thing, like whoever came up with that idea must have been fighting uphill. That is a huge, complicated system for an FF game. I remember the first time I played, it was really tough to get a hang of it, but when you do, it is really, really satisfying to use.
I mean, from a design perspective, those if-else statements that you're writing for your characters is basically, I would imagine that under the hood of all of the enemies, they're just running on if-else statements too. So
Sure.
you're actually making a uniform system that applies to both the player characters and the NPCs. So from a design perspective, it actually probably saves a bunch of effort because you're designing these characters to autoplay, and you had to do that anyway. So it's kind of adding a feature. It's turning something that you were going to have to do anyway into a feature.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
there are
any
definitely... go ahead.
Any video game enemy is always running on scripts. Sometimes they're more obvious than others, but MMO bosses are the same way. They'll do the same battles on the same timers and the same moves on the same timers. So I very good assumption that the AIs are working on the same thing. But the drawback to the Gambit system is that when you have these characters running smoothly, there's very little interaction at all with the fights, except for the very hardest ones, which I think some people had a problem with. But for me, this is the easiest game to grind. No matter what your feelings are about grinding, this is the easiest game ever made to just run your character around, mowing down stuff and picking up items, which in a way is kind of a blessing. Because I would say you do have times when it is pretty beneficial to run around and get more powerful before you move on.
The only thing you can't script is to have your character move. You have to move them towards things, but if you could script it so that they intelligently move towards enemies, because, the only thing that stops them from jumping from enemy to enemy is that there aren't any enemies in sight.
Yeah.
They will jump from enemy to enemy if they are close enough. So if you could just trigger something, like script something that made them walk to an area if there were no enemies to fight, you could automate grinding in this game very easily. The only problem I have with the gambits is that they treat gambits as though they are items. And they are, for all intents and purposes. You buy them. And they're basically if conditionals that you can use. Like, if enemy's HP equals 100%, equals 90%, or is greater than 90, greater than 80, and all the way down. You can have, like, if the enemy's targeting you, if the enemy, targeting the leader of the party, all these sorts of different conditionals. And they each cost, like, 50 gil a pop. And then some of them are 100 gil, like the useful ones. The most useful ones are 100 gil. And they gate which ones you have access to at various times. So there are some conditionals that I would really like that they just don't give me yet. And I know eventually it would make sense, like, hey, I would like one where if the enemy's HP is less than 10%, I attack them, because that means that my characters will focus on finishing enemies off instead of jumping around any enemy who, triggers some other kind of half-measure conditional that I've had to use instead. And my issue is not that, I can't make it work. Obviously, I can make the game play pretty decently without those gambits. It's that I know that there are going to eventually probably be optimal conditionals that I'll have access to, but for some reason the game is, not giving them to me. And I'm having to make decisions about, hey, do I want my characters to deal more damage or take less damage, or do I want the game to autoplay itself better? And that's a weird choice to, impose upon your player.
Well, I think one of the big reasons for the gatekeeping is obviously to keep the complexity level at a certain state at the game to make. I mean, you and I probably handled it not too bad, but when I was, I've sat in on gameplay play testing before, and there are people who, there's a famous, I forget who did it, but somebody played Mass Effect and almost reviewed it without realizing that you could allocate skills or points into skills. That was a famous, yeah, that was a big deal. I forget the context. I believe it was somebody working at a game site who complained about it. And so that is something that you and I would find very that would be surprising to hear. But for this kind of system, it would not surprise me at all to realize that there were a lot of people who got to the Gambit system and weren't being able to figure out why things weren't working. When I was setting up some of my Gambits, would have battles where people weren't attacking, weren't doing anything, and I realized that I had something set higher than it should be in the priority order that was overriding everything else, was something that they couldn't do. So it's an amazing system to me. But I definitely have no hard feelings about people who feel that it's awful or unwieldy or unusable, because I totally see how that could be the case for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, when I first played this game, I pretty much ignored the system because I was used to, controlling my characters directly in Final Fantasy games, and I actually found it to be kind of an affront. And now that I'm playing it with, years of programming under my belt, it makes a ton of sense and I love it. But, the younger version of me not only didn't understand it, but also disliked it on its face. So I can completely get it. It's just, it's an odd thing to make it a purchasable item. I just question that decision.
Yeah.
It's just so useful to have those gambits, but to get access to all of them can cost you thousands of gil. And each individual one is actually quite cheap. But if you want the full array and full access for your characters, then it's going to run you quite a bit. And it's just an odd thing to make, you know, something that people have to pick between. It's a fundamental system.
Yeah. One of the weird things about it is that the gold is not hard to find, but for the most part, if you
in that first level,
my problem is
getting
when
4 XP and 1 LP and maybe some gold if you can steal it from those things.
Once you get to the grinding section of the game, though, you do get a lot of drops of stuff that you can sell. My problem with that system is that you don't always know. It's all in the same miscellaneous tab of the thing. Some of those are actually useful. Like teleport stones are in there too, and that's what you need to teleport around. So if you go through that and sell everything, there's no vendor trash section, which
well,
honestly,
that's what loot's supposed to be. But
Yeah.
they put
the one
in it.
item that makes the fast travel system. It's in the loot sell to the merchant system.
Yeah, it's bizarre. That's my big thing. But
That
if
was
you
a goof.
grind, I hope so.
That was dumb.
So the other major system is the license system.
Stop.
Oh, wait. Go ahead. Sorry.
So, Gino, you said that the younger version of you viewed the Gambit system as an affront to everything that you want out of a Final Fantasy game, and it was needlessly complex.
It wasn't the necessary. Yes, I would say yes. The
Yes.
younger version. That's accurate.
My impression of the Gambit system is it's needlessly complex, and it's an affront to why I play role-playing games. Because my problem with the Gambit system is Square Enix is a developer of video games. They have some of the most creative and talented programmers probably in all of Japan. And yet, every time they have tried to make a role-playing game in real time with real-time combat, they've found these weird half measures of embracing real-time combat.
Yeah,
they've had
very funny.
Their solution to, well, we don't know how to program the artificial intelligence or your AI companions, so how about you do it for us?
Well, I would say
and then in 10.2 it was like, well, you can just make all the choices even though your choices aren't great. And then there's 13 where their solution is it's completely in real time, but there's no choices to make.
They keep keeping this menu-based system in the game, but
these
they
turn-based
keep automating
menu
it
systems in real-time combat games. And it's just this weird anachronism where the gameplay doesn't feel appropriate to how you input the commands. And so here's my problems with the Gambit system. One, Knights of the Old Republic is a really good game. And that's a real-time game, technically. And I keep saying to myself, man, why is the solution, the end goal of properly managing these characters is to buy into the in-game economy for gambits, spend thousands of dollars to find out which gambits are appropriate for very specific and highly specialized scenarios sometimes, and have the game play itself. Or have 2/3 of the game play itself, because you have 3 characters, 1 player control character, and 2 companions.
Well, the player-controlled character, you can give commands to your other characters. The only specialization about the leader is that's the person who you steer, like you move. But everything else about the characters, you can control directly. There's nothing special about any one of them.
You're talking about 12 still? Because you can actually flip
12.
between. You can flip between
you can
characters.
flip between characters, but I mean, why
it's not
would
like
you?
13 or something where the person who you're controlling, if they die, everything's over or something.
Yeah, everything's over. It's just that. So one, you're right, Gino. The problem is that it tries to have this massive kind of Byzantine mechanic be a part of the in-game economy, which feels fucked because your starting gambits aren't that great. And
Well,
sometimes the starting gambits don't feel appropriate for some of the challenges that you're about to face.
I would say the starting gambits are good enough to get you playing and get you, through most stuff. Like, hey, what's the nearest visible enemy? Attack them. That will get you, like, 90% of the game you could get through just fine if that was the only gambit you used. And then there's a couple of easy ones early on, like if your ally's HP is less than 50%, and then you add Cure or Potion, heal.
Sure. But then
Those two will get you most everything.
There would be times where I was trying to set up a gambit, and all of the attacks are grayed out, and it's like, okay, so I've selected I can't use this on a foe. Well, game, could you please tell me what I could use this attack for? Do I have to use on ally or use on Balthier? Like, how do I use some of these abilities that I have access to? What are the gambits? Oh, I don't have the gambits for it? Well, fuck. I guess I've got all these moves that I purchased from the Magic Store that I can't use using the gambit system, even though I would greatly appreciate it.
That's not usually the case. So the Magic stuff, there's two components to every gambit. There's the if conditional and then the then section of it.
And
so
I'm
if
not a
this,
programmer,
then this.
and I've never been a big fan of math, and so this programming-based thing rearing its ugly head is really just intimidating, non-user friendly, and when shit goes sideways and I'm in the middle of a battle and I can't change my gambits during that battle, I just have to deal with these non-functional characters and I have to control them manually almost. Like, it's frustrating to spend minutes upon end programming what I think are functional gambits, go into battle, and then oh, shit, none of this is working. Well, that's great.
So I would say the biggest pitfall I found with the gambits was there's a gambit that's like targeting whatever the leader is targeting. And I thought, hey, that'll cause my characters to focus down one enemy instead of just going off after random enemies. And that works until the character who has that gambit is the leader. In which case, they will just ignore enemies. They won't auto-target anything.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you really do have to know where things go in the list of, like, Cure should be at the top, attacking should be somewhere in the middle. And
it took me hours to figure that out because it's my first time. It seemed it's so fundamental to this game, but the game doesn't take the time to explain any of this shit to you. So it's like,
enough.
Any of the blue abilities you should probably put on top because you're going to need them most because attacks trump all. Put your attacks near the bottom or any of your status abilities up on top, and it's like, wait, do I want to do this before that? And it's like, what's the difference between critical and less than 50%? What do these terms mean? And I don't know. And so I have to go into combat, hope that the game breaks, and see if I can find out which part of this if-then statement broke.
That is exactly what I was saying when I said it feels like debugging.
And
it's an odd thing.
I don't like that. I
haven't had this in a game.
I went into a career that didn't involve math because I felt like I was never good at it. And even when I tried to have like a growth mindset about it, I never felt like I was near competent in terms of using it. And so I feel like this mechanic, I'm going to have to continue just
it's literally
whittling away, trial and error, trying to find these gambits. And Gino, you mentioned how like the gambit system, like buying gambits isn't cool. The other part of that is having to use your license board system to buy new gambit slots is
that's also weird.
That's
dumb. Let's discuss the license board a little bit.
No, I hate the gambit system. It's driving me crazy because I feel like this entire mechanic I haven't wrapped my mind around. And man,
I'll help you with Boolean logic. It'll be okay. We'll sit down. I'll teach you Boolean logic. It'll be great.
No, it's not just the Boolean logic. It's like it feels like Final Fantasy XII has a very Vancian nature, and it's like, okay, so I'm in this sewer where there's these flans that you need to burn because these flans are weak to fire because this level feels like water, and fire beats water, water beats fire. And then for some fucking reason, there's a flaming pony in this fucking place, and now all my characters that I programmed to use fire are healing it because their attacks are on top, and now, fuck. God damn it.
Well, the trick there is just to never program elemental attacks into your gambits unless you are 100% sure that that's the thing. I don't program magic into my gambits at all because I don't trust the enemy types to be the right
and I
types.
just feel like the idea of automating my control over characters is the antithesis of what role-playing games should be about. It's about...
I don't disagree.
I play these characters to live vicariously through this world, and by leveling these characters, I feel like I'm pushing them closer to their end goals. And by automating these systems, by the end goal being automating these systems, I feel like I'm putting a barrier between me and understanding how strong I've made my character, using their strife, using their experiences, using their interpersonal relationships to make them stronger. By automating these systems, by encouraging the player to automate the systems, there is a filter between me and these characters.
So, Rorie, as someone who plays a lot of MMOs, or who's played MMOs more, how did you feel about this system? Like, do you use scripts when you're playing an MMO, or are you actually directly controlling most of the time?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
How did it work for you?
I mostly play WoW, obviously. There are macros you can use. They've actually really... de-macrofied the game in a lot of ways. There's still stuff you can do macro-wise that are really fun, or really kind of automate stuff. Like so in WoW, at least I have a bunch of skills that I use every fight, and then there are these things called trinkets which have activated abilities. So I basically, if you're a really pro level player, you'll activate those trinkets when you need them. I basically want to use them all the time whenever they're on cooldown. So I just say, hey, if I do this attack, use both my trinkets right away. That way I'm never waiting. It's not optimal, but it's also like I'm never going to not use those things when I can. So, but WoW especially has kind of removed a lot of the more powerful macro stuff they encourage people to do, you need to be clicking these skills in order to use them. They just recently added a lot of stuff on the global cooldown, which means that you can't actually do some of these things where you could use one ability and another one in the same button press. So they've taken a lot of that out, whereas FF12 really wants you to automate as much as you can, and for the most part, if you get the system and you can debug that kind of the problem areas, a lot of the fights are going to be pretty trivial. Even as I've been playing through the Zodiac Age, I've been running on 4x speed for the most part, and I'll run around and kill shit because I'm getting experience, getting license ward points, and I found that most of the boss fights have been not a problem at all. Like, they require very little changes, everything goes down pretty quick. Some of the hunts are still pretty tough. And those are the ones where you really, really do need to find a strategy guide and look up what the weaknesses are and what is recommended. Because some of those hunts are borderline impossible without some special.
Oh yeah, I was like, oh, it's time for you to kill the flowering cactuar, and I didn't know what I was signing up for because it's like the third hunt.
Yeah, they get really hard.
And
it's immune to
damn,
physical. It absorbs physical
cactuar
attacks.
So, what the fuck?
Yeah, some of those are super, super hard. I recommend, I think at least one of you are past the spot, there's a point where you get a fifth character, Larsa, for a long period of time, and I just kind of went back, and he's a full part of your party. You can't program him, but he does a lot of stuff on his own, so that is really the grinding part of the game. Just go and rip shit apart for a little while and get over-leveled. I'm trying to think of another. I played Bloodborne not too long ago. I think I beat the end boss on stream, and that is a game you can kind of just get a lot of points, gear up, over level the opponents, and you'll do okay. I'm not saying Bloodborne is easy, but 13 or 12 FF12 is definitely one of those games where you can beat the shit out of most of the stuff in the regular game with a fairly basic set of gambits and just over leveling everything. But the side quest stuff, the hunts.
You try to do even like the most benign or asinine quest line in the side quests, you get your ass handed to yourself.
Yeah. And
it's
sometimes
a weird
it's
thing.
Yeah, and you'll pick up these hunts, and sometimes you'll wander into a hunt because in order to get what I really hate about the hunt system is having to get the hunt, then go to talk to the person who actually gives the hunt, then go do the hunt, and then go back and find out where that person was. Because some of these things can stretch across hours, and you're not really always remembering where everything is. It's not super
really
elegant.
Great iconography in Final Fantasy XII. Like normally there's like a quest giver, even in computer role playing games. I was like looking, where's the quest giver icon over this person's head that I can just go to? Where's the iconography? It's like, oh well, you just need to basically talk to everyone in this room until you find the one person.
Talk to the person with a name. That tends to be it. A real person name.
But I've even
Yeah.
I've even gotten quests or quest marker kind of stuff. I wouldn't say they're full-blown quests, but sometimes talking to people. I mean, what's the main city? I forget what it's called, Ostanabre or something like that.
Rabanaste.
Sometimes
you just talk to people, and then it turns out those conversations give you a quest, and then there's no quest log, so I don't know which quests are active and which quests were just like flavor text of talking to this person.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated, or pretty confusing at least.
Yeah. So the license board is one of the big differences between the versions of the game we're playing. So how does the license board work in your version of the game? Because I am not familiar with it at all.
So I played both, so I'll go ahead and answer this one. So in the original PS2 version, there's one huge license board for everybody, kind of like what Path of Exile does. It's massive.
Or Final Fantasy X.
Except they start in... Well, I mean, start in pretty much the same places on the board.
Yeah.
In 12,
Path of Exile is a top-down Diablo-esque thing with kind of the same system. Yeah, but Final Fantasy X does it too. But in 12, I believe you start in different places, correct?
It is different, but in 10, it's like a grid, and people start on kind of like completely different sections of the grid.
Sure.
In 12. It's a grid, and people do start in different places, but the general area where they start is very similar. Like, the difference between where Vaughn starts, like, he starts with swords unlocked. Pinello starts with, like, daggers unlocked. They're maybe, like, 2 squares apart. You know, it's not that far. They start in just about the same place. Like, Vaughn might start with steel, and Pinello might start with, like, white magic. But ultimately, the distance between those 2 squares is really short. So if you want to get Vaughn to where Pinello is, you can do that within, like, you know, a half hour of starting the game. Whereas in Final Fantasy X and some of the other games that use this unified system, but have people starting on different places, it might take you, 20 hours before you can really make one character start learning stuff from another character's section of the tree.
Yeah.
And it's an odd way of doing it in the old version of 12.
But in the end, the weird thing about that is that every character will have every skill unlocked, as far as I recall. In 12, you actually do select, or in Zodiac Age, you do select jobs. Every character can have 2 jobs, and those license boards will be very much kind of smaller and have a very restricted set of skills. So the big question for 12... A1, no respecking at all. You can't go back.
Yeah, that was the thing that I mentioned in our chat when we were talking about this game. It's like, well, this is the first start of the game, and man, I keep having these problems when I'm doing these side quests that someone's low at health. I guess I'll make Vaughn a white mage, thinking that it would be great for him to have a cure spell. Oh, wait, he's stuck being a white mage for the rest of the game? Say what?
Well, you get two of the license boards in the thing, and they are both active at the same time. So there's a lot of – honestly, there's no consensus as to what is the best stuff. And the thing is, you don't even have to give them – you don't have to use every license board. So there are 12 of them, all Zodiac sign kind of stuff. There's, Samurai I'm not going to say all these names right, but there's Battle Mage, a few warrior-focused classes. So the big question is whether you want to supplement a – melee kind of character with some magic skills, or you want to try to focus them all on one thing. And it seems like it's pretty easy. Like, if you really wanted to fuck your game up heavy, you would do like a warrior combo for each of them. You don't have to pick. You can go through the entire game without a mage. And if you're not super familiar with every license board and what the different choices are, it's pretty easy to fuck it up and not be able to correct the mistakes until later on. I have a feeling on the default difficulty, if you the default campaign difficulty you can overpower, but there's definitely places you could make your party into something that could not complete all the optional quests with pretty easily, I would say.
So
I like it. I really. Oh, sorry.
No, I didn't know. So it's all job based, and each person can be a hybrid of 2 different jobs, basically. And in those sections of jobs, you get the equipment they would equip, a couple of passives, a couple of active abilities.
Yeah, for example, if you do a knight with like I think it's a monk, you basically turn them into a paladin. And so the hybridization of these jobs, it's not like physically changing, but it's something that you notice as you level them up. You start to have these kind of melded together abilities. I like it. I think that the fact that there's no respec option is absolutely insane, and in a role-playing, it's unconscionable. And shame on them for dropping this massive mechanic and not properly scaffolding how to take advantage of it and what the pitfalls of making your decisions are. The game literally drops this mechanic on you, and it's like, well, peace, have fun with the job system. It's like, what? And then you can kind of mess yourself up, but a lot of care and attention was put into this job system to where every job combination is viable, is the way that I looked it up. When I basically got a little anxious about committing to one job or the other, the way that I saw it presented by multiple guides and websites is take a deep breath. Almost all of these jobs, unless you really, really spec a character wrong, like make a mage into a physical character with no other mage-like abilities, these combinations are viable. They have nuanced but not critical changes to your characters or how you would take advantage of your characters. And it's fun. It's an interesting way to take jobs and integrate them into the license board. Because when you stop and think about it, the license board is really dry. And when it's not connected with the progression of the characters, like physical progression of the characters and what you have, and like if it's not attached to something that feels tangible, it's a very dry mechanic. You're just basically moving on this grid.
I agree. So, question, how do the quickenings work on the jobs in, the Zodiac Age?
That's a very different kind of... So there are quickenings, and there are also espers. The quickenings and I'm going to get this confused a little bit. I still have...
espers, you have to unlock the espers. They are the summons of the game, and via story points and side quests, you get access to them. Mm-hmm. But the quickenings, in at least the old version of the game, they are basically these super moves that exist on the edges of the license board. Yeah. You kind of have to work your way out, and once a character unlocks a quickening, that removes the quickening from everyone else's boards. So the way that, I get directed to how I'm going to kind of create my characters in the old version of 12 is I look at all the quickenings on the board, see where they all are, and then try to figure out the most efficient way to get my characters to those spots on the board so they can unlock their super moves.
I think it's a little different in, I don't know, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but for me the quickening thing has been very difficult to get around, but with the new system, because quickenings can exist, I wish I had the game in front of me to double check this stuff, but quickenings can exist in different places on your two boards, and sometimes, and here's where shit gets really weird, sometimes you can unlock a quickening that will unlock a little path on the other board on your character. So sometimes quickening can be in two places, and sometimes if you unlock it in one place, it'll be removed from the other place, but then you won't be able to get the skills that were behind it on the other board. If I'm reading the shit correctly, I honestly have gotten through a fair amount of the game without assigning quickenings to almost. I haven't done any espers or no characters have. I think a few characters have some quickenings. Almost none of them have any espers because I haven't been able to figure out which one should get it. And this is where I get really frustrated. I feel like I'm a pretty competent RPG player. I would really at this point prefer to have somebody tell me exactly what the best party composition is going to be, which characters get which quickenings and which characters get which espers, just to take all the guesswork out of this, because I have been super confused by it. And if there was a respec option, even if it was expensive, I would fuck around with it and try to figure out what to do. The fact that there isn't anything has left me kind of paralyzed in terms of making these choices that feel pretty important to making your characters feel powerful.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I am emotionally right now. So, Gino, you asked it, and I looked it up. It looks like each character has 3 quickenings, and they're static for each of those 3 characters.
Okay, that's interesting, because in the original game, there were 18 quickenings on the board, and you had to just kind of figure out how to get your characters to those locations. But some of the quickenings, they make sense, like, hey, there's 2 in the magic section of the board. And the board is kind of broken down into, in the top, there's like a section where it's all magic stuff. There's a section with all passive buffs. There's a section with techniques. Then in the bottom part of the board, there's a section with equipment, like armor. There's a section with weapons. And then in those in the corners there are quickenings. So there are some quickenings that you're going to get because, hey, my caster went up here and there's a quickening in this section of the board. I'm getting them new skills that I need to play the game. But then some quickenings are, in the edges of the equipment section. So if you want to get this quickening, you're going to have your character get a license for great swords and a license for katanas and a license for bows. And so I basically find quickenings to be frickin' broken, just completely broken. I make a beeline for them as soon as I can. They have gotten me through. I'm actually much further than what we're going to stop discussing in this podcast. But every boss I've come into, I am able to kill in 2 quickenings.
Wow. My experience has been the opposite. Like, I find them almost the ones that I have unlocked have been basically bounced off people. Like, they don't do anything.
Yeah.
So the way the quickening system works is interesting, and I feel like I should explain it because it's a fucking oddity in this game.
It's a weird version of the limit break system that I feel like the Final Fantasy.
It's a quick time event.
Yeah. Well, of course it's a quick time event because this was the early 2000s when everything that looked like this was a quick time event.
No, but I mean it literally. Like, the way that you play the quickening section is every character who has a quickening unlocked will show up, who's in your current party, will show up as one of the 3 face buttons. Yeah. Triangle, square, or X in the the PS2 version of the game. If they have a full MP bar, they will show up as being an option to click next. So you'll launch the quickening with one character, and then your other 2 characters, if they have full MP and a quickening available, will be available to click next. You can also hit R2 to kind of re-roll, and what will happen is you will occasionally get an option called Missed Charge. This will cause your character's MP to be refilled. So what you want to do is keep chaining these together one after another. So you want to go like, Fran, then Balthier, then Vaughn. And then anytime you see a missed charge, that gives you an extra shot at it. And you keep re-rolling the die until you, kind of chain these moves one after another. And, when you get your first quickening, it gives you access to this attack. When you get 2 quickenings, it doubles your MP.
I looked it up. Whoever's looking it up. But yeah, Gino, it's totally different in the Zodiac edition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a huge change. So, and in fact, it highlights how the quickenings kind of are another anachronism in the game because your characters are very tabula rasa and you can meld them into whatever you want. And to have your characters have these static quickenings, it feels far less effective because you could change Vaughn into a support character and he has all these DPS quickenings that don't meld well with his job or what you are using for
what do they
this
do?
Game. So it's the same 18 that you mentioned, except they are statically divided between your characters, all of the characters.
Sure, but is it just a super move that they do?
So it's basically a limit break, and the change is that it's just a special attack that doesn't cost MP, nor does it give you any MP. And each character has 3 quickenings available, and every quickening license on a particular job will get you certain characters' level 1 versions of that quickening. So the jobs, like leveling up the quickenings, are on the job board versus like you just can infinitely chain them together. So we could only right now during this game, we only have the level 1 version, and until we unlock the level 2 version on the board, we can't do a level 2 chain with the quickening.
So I just have a question. Does the quickening, when you hit quickening, you enter a little sub-menu with your characters, right? And they each are assigned to a different button, and then sometimes you get mischarge, and then you get additional attacks? Or is it just a super move that happens?
There's still the misgauge, but the misgauge right now only has 1 bar.
Okay, that's fine. Oh. Yeah, so, that happens, and that makes it do, like,
more
not
quickenings
shit.
On the job board. So right now, Vaughn only can do red spiral. That's
okay. Okay, so the system behaves the same, just the way that the quickenings are distributed is different.
Yes,
like
and
you just
on
have
the
access
board,
to them.
There are places for you to unlock the quickenings, and they're kind of like they're floating in the ether of the board.
Yeah,
but
so
Vaughn can only perform red spiral, white world, or pyroclasm. That's it.
Okay, good. That's the same as good. Okay, at least the system is not completely different because the way you were describing it, it sounded like it was completely different. Like the actual what happens when you hit quickening was different, but it is not. Okay, so what it does is as you get different levels of quickening, level 1, level 2, level 3, they will like the first one you get just gives you access to this super move. The second level will double your MP and give you access to level 2 of your super move, which will, if you hit the level 2 version, it will use your full 2 meters and deal more damage, but it won't give you access to, chain more hits because you've used both charges instead of one at a time. And then once you get 3, you get a third section of MP, basically, and then access to your, final move that does yet more damage. So the trick is chaining these moves between your 3 party members. Once you get them involved in a quickening, by the end of the quickening, they will have no MP left. So it's kind of an all-in sort of move. But if you can chain like 7 or 8 hits between your characters, at the end of the move, you will get a super attack. If you chain 3 or more, you'll get a move called Inferno, which does non-elemental damage to all enemies in the section. If you chain like 8 or more, you get Cataclysm, which is even more powerful non-elemental damage. And what that will do is it lets you just spend all of your MP all at once, but deal like 8,000 damage to everything on screen, all in one burst, when the enemy can't interact with you.
Doesn't
honestly, it might be. I've honestly had just a harder time with the super moves
and
because
you're making it sound like it's easy, but for me, it was really hard to do quickening.
Oh yeah, it's hard, and you need like quick reflex. It's weird because it's like it's a quick time event. It's reflex driven. It's not any of the other skills, and by skills I mean like things that you learn how to play JRPGs. This does not test any of them. This is a quick time event, and you need to just like randomly re-roll and just hit those buttons as fast as you possibly can. And if you do it, sometimes you'll just kill these bosses without even interacting with their mechanics. But if you don't, then you have to play the actual game. And for a lot of the boss fights that I've encountered, and even some of the harder hunts at the point in the game where I am, which is pretty medium, I find that the quickenings, if I can just use, one party worth of quickenings, then rotate in a second person who has a full meter, start a quickening with them, and then hopefully, continue the chain just by getting mischarges, and then rotate in the next character and rotate in the next character, I can get like 6 quickenings off and just level the opponent. And if I haven't, I'll use an ether and I'll do it again. And then I'm not even interacting with the buffs or the healing or the combat. I'm just killing them with QuickTime events.
I can't say that's not impossible in Zodiac Age. Just for me, I've been playing most of this game on 4x speed, and I think my experience so far is that I've been wrecking all the bosses. The hunts, I've definitely hit hunts where maybe this would come in handy because there have been some hunts. Hunts are, so I don't know if you explained, they're basically bounty hunts you get from a certain zone, and you have to go out and kill. Anyone finding some of these things is really hard. Some of them have these weird, I don't want to go off on a whole different system here. We're still talking about the license boards, but the quickening stuff for me, I've found when I've used them. Maybe I'm not doing it right, but they just don't do that much damage for me.
If you're at 4 times speed, it might be hard to even do them properly.
Oh, I don't know if that would speed up. I can't, because obviously 4x speed doesn't speed up like cutscenes. I have a feeling there's a smart way that they're flipping back and forth. Like I don't think so. It's if you don't, there's a button you hit, go 2x speed. All the combat and everything takes place at that quicker speed. I use 4x just because I know that I'm not in much danger from regular enemies. But the cutscenes and everything like that go regular speed.
Because if I had to execute what I'm executing at 4x speed, it would be impossible. I would get no damage from it. And it's fair to say, like, if I don't hit, 3 or 4 chains in a row, 3 or 4 attacks in a row, it does no damage, and it's just a complete waste. If you do it like 4, 5, 6, if you get into like 8-hit combos, then you kill everything on screen.
This might be a subject to come back to because I haven't played the game much in the last couple of months, but I need to. And honestly, this was something that was super confusing to me. I seem to recall it being a way easier in the first game, but this might be something for me to research more and play a little bit more with and see if we're probably closer than we think in terms of what we're talking about. But
yeah, and espers I think espers are similar. They also use an entire bar, and that's something we'll get into later. But just on the license system, something we haven't really talked about is there's equipment and items and spells that you can buy and cannot use until you unlock a license for it. It's literally a license.
Yeah.
It's kind of a vestige of the judges from from Tactics.
Sure.
Like, there's this idea of combat in this world being under kind of the context of laws. So you have to obey certain laws when you're in combat with each other. Otherwise, a judge shows up and arrests you, which is an interesting concept. But the way they articulate it in this game is you can't use certain weapons until you buy a license for it, which kind of causes this decoupling where sometimes you'll pick up an item from a drop and you can't use it because you don't have a license for it, and no one's near the section of the board where you can acquire the license in a expedient amount of time, and then you just got this awesome item that you can't use for a while because you spec'd your character in a different way.
Yeah, and it's even worse with this new job system, because if you spec a character in a certain job, you might never be able to put that on a character.
Yeah,
it's weird.
It's
a
weird.
Weird system,
but I actually kind of like it. I find that it basically forces you to find the maximum amount of utility out of every character, and it integrates a lot of it. Although, and I've said this a couple times to people that I've talked to about it, I don't think this game gets anything out of its setting or borrowing the mechanics of Ivalice and Final Fantasy Tactics, because when it's like, there's this system where you have to buy the license for it. It's like it feels integrated with the license system rather than, it's kind of this weird homage to Final Fantasy Tactics. And in general, I don't know what Final Fantasy XII gets out of being set in Ivalice.
I think it
gets almost nothing out of it because it's so separate and segmented away from Final Fantasy Tactics.
I think it just signifies that it's going to be this high drama between different nations in a way that most Final Fantasy games, they tend to be smaller ensemble stories, but this game is a lot more about the drama between these nations. The interpersonal drama between your party is, I think, very clearly secondary to what's going on between Arcadia and Dalmasca and the other nations around them.
For me, it was just like, I guess capitalism runs the roost and you have to buy everything. You have to buy into the world economy, and this is if capitalism runs amok, but also capitalism is your way out. And I kind of like that. This is the most pro-capitalistic game I've seen so far, Gino.
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah, capitalism.
And another odd thing with the license board is that a lot of the time it feels like I'm just giving people licenses, at least when it comes to weapons, I'm just giving people licenses because I have access to a weapon and I'm cash strapped. So I'm not necessarily unlocking licenses for people because I want them to use the weapon. I'm unlocking licenses for people because their weapons are now outclassed. I have a better one in my inventory, and if I don't give them a license for it, then they're just going to be underpowered.
I have the exact opposite problem where, and to clarify, when you fight almost anything, you get one license point. Sometimes you get more, but even if you go back to the very beginning of the game, I think you're still getting 1 LP for every single monster that you fight. So I have gone through at 4X and have just amassed I'm spending them all, but I have way more LPs. I've unlocked a lot of each character's board, and I am well ahead of any weapon that I even have. At this point, I'm kind of buying these stuff that are passive buffs. There's some really stuff. Swiftness is a huge one, 10% more speed. HP, MP increases are really big. I'm actively kind of avoiding all the accessory and weapon stuff because there are weapons that I could unlock now in my license boards that I will not have for hours and hours. So at this point, my license point, I've probably grinded way too much at this point because the bosses are all going down way too easy. But I don't mind that so much. It's more like I don't really have a huge amount more to spend my license points on because I've gotten all the passive buff, which are the passive buffs and gambit slots are really the huge ones for.
Yeah. And again, having to buy gambit slots by using your points just is such a weird thing because I have to buy into the game economy in order to make my characters workable and usable. It's just I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with that.
It's super odd, especially in the older version, because everyone has the same license board, and because at least when I'm playing, the quickenings are the draw. They are the thing that you want to get to as quick as possible. So there are some characters who are like deep into the passive buffs. Like Pinello for me has no quickenings and has like tons and tons of passive buffs, has unlocked very few other things because I'm trying to get her to a quickening that's very far away from everyone else, because everyone else I've got kind of mapped out, and she's kind of the last character that gets added to your party. But by the time I'm doing all of this, she's the only person kind of deep into passive town. Everyone else, because most of the other quickenings are located in other parts of the board, it's much more efficient for me to send them into Technique Land or Magic Land or even like Heavy Armor Land to get the super moves, because they are what matters. So it's just this odd thing where I've got some characters who are like really efficacious in combat because they've got tons of passive buffs, way more health, a bunch of different skills, but they're all these fiddler crab characters where they've got a ton of stuff in one section and then otherwise they're kind of unworkable. And eventually they will all round out, but I'm at the point right now where they're all fiddler crabs.
And I guess this is where I start. I like the license board system, especially when it's connected or melded into the job system of the Zodiac edition. But I guess where I start to push back is that this is another mechanic that feels like it's in service of baking grinding into the core of Final Fantasy XII. Like grinding is in Final Fantasy XII's DNA, and every mechanic is in service of presenting more grinding, or the solution is grinding. Jobs make grinding more efficient, and the same goes for virtually every other mechanic in the game. And you can even have the game play itself so as that you can grind the most efficiently. And the AI, once you get there, I guess is very good at grinding, but you're still grinding.
So that's why I specifically beeline for the quickenings. I find that those super moves are so powerful that it gets me around grinding. I hate grinding personally, and so because there's this other system in the game, it allows me to appreciate this game a lot more, because the grind, it's literally walking your characters around, and if I had 4 times speed, I might feel better about it, but at 1 times speed, slowly wandering my characters around, murdering everything, that's not really a challenge to me. It's not the most rewarding gameplay.
It is.
But
at the time, it was a game that took a very long time to get through. And I would never, well, I'm not going to say I would never play this game at 2x or 4x if it was my first time through. But having known that there are parts of this game that are a little bit, like I said that before, we have Larsa behind. He's kind of a character that you take from one place to another. But in between those two places, you can go to anywhere you visited before. So you take him around, you do all the hunts that you missed or were too hard the first time. He's a big help in that. He's a big help.
He's got a macro that high potions you whenever you're below 50%.
And he's a
dude makes it rain.
Yeah, he's a huge part of that, and he makes grinding more bearable. And the 4X obviously does too. I would never say that grinding is a good thing in any game, but there are certain games that it kind of is, like you said, baked in.
Did any of you notice that you unlock lore entries and other tidbits when you kill specific enemies?
I did. It's odd.
I feel like it's an understatement to say that this game is a bit grindy when parts of the lore and the world building is only unlockable when you kill certain and specific enemies.
And it's also odd, there's a section, I don't know if you've looked in your menu, there's a clan hall section in there.
I guess
and
there's the clan
gifts.
system too, which is, again, another grinding mechanic where you get it when you beat certain bosses or enemy encounters, and then there are the weird enemies that only show up when you enter an environment, and you have to fulfill their very specific parameter to make them spawn in that environment.
Yeah, there's a lot of subsystems in this game, and I think it says a lot about this game that we've spent an hour talking about various subsystems, and the early part of this game's story has been completely ignored.
Well, guess what, guys? This game doesn't have a fucking story in the first 10 hours.
Well, you did a lot of side quests.
I did
early.
all of the
I
side
got around
quests
them.
in the first chapter.
It
Which was
picks
a
up.
mistake.
It does take.
It picks up.
Well, real quick, I want to go back to that hunt thing real quick because
Go right ahead.
you mentioned the system where you have to figure out how to make things spawn. Some of that shit is not obvious at all. I would say, not even close to being something you could figure out without a guide on the side, and that's very frustrating from a
There was the weird one on the coast that I accidentally made spawn, and I wasn't of the level, so I wasn't of a level to beat them.
There are some things where you have to kill every other enemy in the zone before they'll appear. There's some that only appear like when it rains.
And then there are others where you have to like not kill certain enemies. Like there was the one by the coastline, the Greedon, where you have to stay in one location and you have to stay alive, which isn't easy in that very early part. And you need to not kill a cactuar, which when you're in an environment where there's a lot of cactuars attacking you, is pretty tough to go 2 minutes without killing a cactuar.
Yeah, it's one of the more frustrating aspects. I mean, every FF game has these optional stuff where you really can't figure it out without a guide. I felt some of that was...
There's one where you need to have a character in critical health, and that's fucked. that's fucked.
Yeah, it's weird. It's just one thing I wanted to go back to real quick. But the storyline stuff... For what I feel, it's kind of, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's a little overwrought at times, but they do a pretty good job when you get to the meat of it, of making you feel like the world really is in peril, and you're the only ones who can stop it, which is good. Some of the evil guys are just evil to be evil.
Oh, Vayne is the worst.
Yeah.
Early on...
Of course, Vayne is the well-intentioned extremist, and he's trying to suck up to all the characters so they don't realize he's a dictator.
Yeah, basically. It's kind of an interesting story, I think, because early on, obviously Vaughn has no place in this story early on. You have to control him. You get introduced to Vayne, and he is a democratically elected...
king. No, he's a crown prince.
He's the son of the emperor, but everyone, it seems, in Arcadia who's in power is elected to their position. So even though he is a son, he is not the viceroy of Dalmasca or Rabanasta because he is the son. Though obviously, you win more popularity contests when you're the son of the emperor. But he says, at least in a speech, that he was elected to be, the representative to kind of preside over Rabanasta. And he talks to, I think it's Miguelo, and says, call me Vayne. I'm just a citizen like everyone else. And early on, he seems like a nice enough dude.
Well, he also has that really overwrought speech that I think Rorie was kind of suggesting. Is he has this really overwrought, shitty speech where he's talking about, I'm trying to do the best for you. I realize we've gone through a war, yada, yada, yada. And
you don't have to like
me, please. But if you don't like me, that's okay. And then everyone starts applauding for no fucking reason in particular.
You don't have to like me, but if we could keep the blood out of the streets and keep the trains moving on time, guys, we can get past this. And it's just like, early on, he doesn't seem overtly evil, but everyone from Arcadia believes he is very deeply evil. And at a certain point, you have to kind of believe all the people who have spent the most time with him, who all say he's evil.
Because the game spends a significant amount of time making him seem well-intentioned, and we don't see him directly murder and kill people. It's always either after the fact or he just arrives on the scene. And so I feel like this is a Final Fantasy game. At some point, during this introductory scene, Vayne should have just started murdering people. I think the whole point is that he's the villain, and the villain eventually has to do... There are these times where you just have to assume he's evil.
So early on, he gives that speech, and the speech is supposed to put people at ease. And then the resistance or the insurgency, which subtle.
They're terrorists.
They're either terrorists or they're a noble resistance force. There's this banquet basically that Vayne is holding, and they are going to make a move on him. And you basically, it's the section that I want to kind of close with is when Vaughn is kind of breaking into this place to steal back some of the treasures of Dalmasca.
Just getting there is not fun because you got to go to the desert and got to take the stone and you got to power up the stone and you got to do that 2 or 3 times and then you have to bring the stone back and then the guy gives you advice and then you have to go back into the sewers and then you have to kill some rats in order to get to the sewers and then take the right exit, not the left exit because the left exit's just going to take you to the next part of the sewers. The right exit's going to take you to this conveniently located entrance into the palace that they probably should have fixed because this is the palace of the emperor.
Well, who's going to get a stone and then break it? Actually, you don't need the stone to break in. You need the stone to break into the treasury, but not into the palace.
And I also want to point out that there is a segment of the break-in where you basically auto-lose if you get in a fight, right? You have to sneak past all the guards, despite the fact that you're very competent warriors at this point. It's such a weird tone to become like a sneaking game. And
there are weirdly, oddly placed mini-games. Like when you are in the dining hall, you have to like shout at the fucking guards to move them away so as that you can sneak around them. And that just feels like a tonal anachronism. Like it's just a totally out-of-place mini-game. And then these guards keep catching me, and then they're like, oh, just go over here. We're not going to arrest you.
Just restart this segment, You can't be here. But the heist moment, it's not a very well-executed heist, but it really is when a lot of stuff starts to come together. You meet Bosch, and at this point, Vaughn still thinks... You meet Balthier, but you do meet Bosch, too. He's a prisoner, if I recall.
You meet him after you get captured.
Okay.
So first you meet Balthier, and you basically get to the treasure that you're trying to steal at the same time as Balthier and
Who's
Fran.
Balthier?
Balthier is
the swaggery.
Oh, you mean Han Solo. Okay, got it. Cool. Got it. Han Solo.
He's a fun character. I do like him more than a lot of the other characters.
He's the best character so far in the story, and he's just got a swagger and a level of confidence that it amazes me that Square didn't feel like we should inject some personality into Vaughn when every other fucking character has personality.
And you did mention the accents before. I think Balthier's. I always want to say Balthier for some reason, but Balthier's accent
seems
is perfect
vaguely
for him.
French.
Yeah, his accent is just perfect for him. It's at least in the American version. It's swaggery and kind of disinterested in everything, but he's still the hooker with a heart of gold kind of thing.
It's really weird to see a character like Balthier and then compare him to Vaughn, and to just have Square miss the mark so spectacularly with characters like Pinello and Vaughn when there are characters like Ash and Bosch and Balthier, and they're treated like secondary to Vaughn and Pinello.
Yeah, and it's extra funny to me. Just Balthier starts with a gun. He's
totally
he's a
not
pirate.
supposed to use a gun when you actually have him in combat.
Yeah, you have to. His gun is quickly outclassed by everything else.
Really quick, though, I have to mention this before we move on. Some characters, and this is my favorite, my weirdest thing about this is that animation, some characters have weapons that they seem to be intended to use. Like Fran, for some reason, I think she uses a bow, or she does. But her animation frames are slower with a bow than any other character. So you actually, at the same period of time, you do fewer attacks than any other character with a bow.
Yeah. The characters have starting weapons that are the complete opposite of what you want them to have.
This is a deep cut. It doesn't make any difference in the actual way the game plays, but it's so weird that this kind of stuff, it feels like an oversight, and honestly, most fights are going to be over really quick, but like that is such a weird trivia piece for this game. I just had to bring it up because it's so fucking weird.
Wow. So you're telling me if I want high-level play, if I want to be a speedrunner of Final Fantasy XII, Fran can't use a bow because her frames are worse.
We're talking like one frame. We're talking like one attack in like a minute or something like that. Nothing too crazy, nothing like game-breaking, but it is actually a little bit slower than other characters.
And if you wanted to know, Gino, they redistributed the stats so as that certain characters that were previously overpowered or underpowered are slightly more useful in the Zodiac edition.
Well, in the original version of the game, no characters are over or underpowered that I've noticed that much because ultimately they are all blank slates who will all be licensed to kill.
I don't know.
Yeah. Eventually. But at least in the early part of the game, Fran's it's kind of interesting because when you beat bosses, like, you get these victory poses, and if you have a character equipped with a weapon that they are supposed to use, they do a cooler victory animation than if they are using a weapon that they clearly are not comfortable with. Like, if you give Vaughn a sword and a shield, he will spike the sword like it's a football and then stand on it after you kill a boss. Or, like, Fran will stand with a bow and an arrow in her mouth. But if you give someone a weapon that they're not that comfortable with, they'll just kind of stand and pose and flex.
It'd be funnier if they did the worst thing possible, like hold a sword by the blade or something like that. Like, I don't know what I mean.
Oh, that... well, I don't know. Oh, Pinello.
Yeah.
That's not where the bomb goes.
It's such a weird dichotomy of a game. Like, they really... In the original game, these characters seem like they have intentions or are weighted toward a certain gameplay from the way they carry themselves in the story, but then you can make anybody, anything, which is kind of what they do in Final Fantasy. It's a really interesting comparison to Final Fantasy XIV or 11, where you really only have one character slot, and they can become anything they want. They can change jobs all the time, as opposed to something like WoW, where you have to pick a class and level it up to the entire... you have to get that to the end of the game. Or most RPGs really have characters have one class. They can't multi-spec into anything they want. So 12, and it felt like they rolled that back with Zodiac Age, where you really have to kind of specialize your characters. And again, it can't be overstated. The lack of respecking, even a very expensive respecking option, is insane. I don't know how that could be put into a game that was released in 2017 or 18, whenever the Zodiac Age came out on PC. It's insane. It makes me feel so hesitant to choose anything. And even knowing intellectually that I can't do anything so bad with I'm a decent RPG player, and I've played this game before. I know I can't fuck up anything so bad that I won't be able to beat the game. But knowing that, especially as FF, there are all these optional challenges that you really have to optimize yourself for. You have to min-max, and you have to do that kind of stuff. And if I do anything wrong, it makes me not want to choose anything and grind shit out until there's a point where I have to commit to it. And it's I know this is all internal mental stuff, and a lot of people play it without any of this kind of hassle, but for me, the lack of respect is just the single worst thing about this game.
So like I said, and then the problem is that during these early portions, like, I made Pinello my white mage. She's not going to be a part of our party for quite some time now, and so now I don't have a fucking white mage.
Very true.
I don't have a white mage for, I don't know, I guess 5 more hours of the game?
It's the long time she's out of the game.
Ugh! Yeah. And so now I have to use chugging potions and that sort of stuff, and it's like, really screwed myself over on that one.
I can't believe that only one character could have white magic, though.
It's dumb. That's not true.
That's not true.
You can have multiple characters pick the same table, but there's only 12 tables, and each of the 6 characters have 2 license boards. So if you use every one, you'll use them all. You don't have to use them all. You can have every character be a white mage if you want them to, but they're going to be losing out on all these other classes that will have special weapons and stuff like that. So you can make every character a very well balanced, like, warrior mage kind of thing if you want to, and you definitely win the game with that. But if you want to expand yourself out into these other weirder kind of combinations, it's tough, man. Especially when you think of...
It's really well balanced for the main story, but the minute you want to interact with the side content or the optional side quests, you could definitely fuck yourself over.
And what I really think of is the fact that you run into these characters over the course of the game. You really don't know you really don't know how to make a 6-person character, especially if this is the first time through the game. You're making choices that last the entire game without the full amount of information that you need. It's overwhelming. I find it almost overwhelming to me, who have played this game before. If this is your first time playing this game, the Zodiac Age, I would run straight. And the thing is, I ran straight to Google. What is the best party for Final Fantasy XII?
And Zodiac everyone Age? Has their own idea.
You get a dozen different things, and I'm sure they're all fine. For some reason, even the one that I picked, I don't feel like it's all that great. I have like a 3-person party that's really good, and then my B team, which feels markedly worse. And that's just one of these like mental things that this game forces on you, which is really baffling.
Yeah, and it's also worth mentioning, like, even if you're playing the game without the Zodiac and the job system and everything, if you're playing the old version of the game, like some of these weapons and the different weapon classes, they don't really explain to you why you'd want to use a sword with strength 20 versus a bow with strength 20 versus a rod versus a hand axe. Like, they are different weapons. Yes, the animations will be different, but the stats on them can be remarkably similar. Some of them, the advantage is it's one-handed versus two-handed. You can get a shield, and your shields will increase your ability to parry, and that'll increase your defense. Okay, that makes sense. But what about a javelin versus a pole? Or, a spear versus a pole? Or a hand axe versus a sword? Now, if you use the hand axe, you'll see that hand axes they have a very high max damage, but they do irregular amounts of damage per hit. So they can do anywhere from 0 to like 400 damage, and it can be anywhere in between. Some hits will do exactly average. Some of them will do very high. Some of them will do very low. But, they average out to being about the same as a sword of the same amount of power.
And then there's the fact that
that's a difference.
And then there's the fact that some of the swords or some of the things you unlock on your license board are not easily available. Like, some of these things are very rare weapons. If you ever want to drive yourself crazy, there is a spear from the original game.
Oh, I read about that. The Zodiac Sphere.
Zodiac Sphere.
Not open treasure chests in order if you want to have it.
If you want to have it near the end of the game, you have to not be opening treasure chests all throughout the game, specific ones, and at some point later on you can get it. They removed a lot of that for Zodiac Age, but it was. Just read about it. It's one of the most powerful weapons in the game. In order to get it, you have to know exactly what to do all throughout the game. You basically have to read a walkthrough or a strategy guide to get this. And it is just, it makes no sense at all in elegant game design, and
I checked it out on the guide. It's like, click this if you're playing Zodiac Edition. Click this if you're playing the vanilla version. And when I click the Zodiac Edition, there's like this giant red tab talking about the Zodiac Sphere. And it's like, oh, by the way, you're playing the Zodiac Edition. Disregard all of our red notes. And every single note is like 3 or 4 paragraphs about what you need to do in order to have a shot at having this weapon in each environment. It's insane.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Yeah, look it up. No, seriously.
Yeah,
it
Gino,
is one of the least. One of the least
I know. I've
elegant...
looked it up. I have the guidebook. I read that shit, and I was like, fuck that, no.
It is one of the least elegant ways. I mean, honestly, like, Final Fantasy X had the ultimate upgrade weapons for all your weapons, and you would never know.
Dodging lightning. That's so much fun, dodging lightning.
You would never, ever know how to do that kind of stuff without a strategy guide. This feels so much worse in that you can fuck up your chances to do it just by playing the game normally. Which is just such a bad design decision. I mean, this is for the hardcore people who are obviously going to have strategy guides anyways, but the pièce de résistance of shitty game design, the way it was originally implemented.
I stand by the fact that the only good one of these is the Final Fantasy IX Excalibur 2. Beat the game and get to the end of the game in 12 hours.
But how is that viable for anyone other than you?
Oh, it's not. I just think that's you don't need to know that much. Actually, you need to know a ton about the game to even be able to do it that fast. But, hey, get to the end of the game in this time. However you do it, we don't care. Just get here this fast. I think that's an interesting challenge versus like, well, you need to know that this treasure chest, only on Sundays you can open it. And then this one, if your system clock is 777, then you can open it. And then you have a 50% chance of the Zodiac Spear being in this cask.
It's dumb.
Yeah. Yo, can we talk about how the drop charts in this game are bananas?
Oh, yeah. Like, if you do open up chests, sometimes you'll get something completely useless, and sometimes you'll get an overpowered weapon that you now don't need to grind for.
And sometimes the chest won't be there.
Yeah. Treasure chests are really weird in Final Fantasy XII.
Yeah, some section, there's a drop chart for whether the treasure chest shows up. Then the treasure chest has a drop chart, which is either bad item or amazingly overpowered item, or sometimes it's just like a gambit I've already unlocked. And then then there's an item that's like a diamond bangle that when you have it, it gives you a different drop chart, which is like an even worse item or an even better item.
Yeah.
Why like this?
Looking through it, luck defines a lot of Final Fantasy XII, especially when you start to get into the side quests or the,
and especially
the
in the
optional
early game.
content. Like, yeah, you're right. Even in the early game, like just being able to beat some of those early hunts feels like a percent of a percent, or like there's a 50% he'll run away and then you need to chase after him, or there's a 50% chance that he'll use this attack that will instantly KO your character.
Yeah, there's some times in this game where, like, just a specific item dropping from a specific enemy was the difference between a character, like an actual character in my party, being useless or being overpowered, because they didn't have. I only had like 5 good weapons, and I couldn't afford a 6th. And thankfully, an enemy dropped a good weapon, and so now they could be as powerful as everyone else. Otherwise, they'd be stuck with a hand-me-down of a hand-me-down.
And what is especially heinous is some of the mainline story bosses have like a percent that they'll drop a very super powerful, useful item, or that you can steal it. But should you beat that enemy and you didn't get it, you can't get it.
Yeah, it's weird. So just
there's one more thing I wanted to say about the mechanics real quick. And that is, especially in the Zodiac edition, when you're picking these player character jobs, and I don't know if maybe they did a little bit more, scaffolding for the characters in the original version, but you really don't understand what the specialities of these characters are, what their strengths are. Like, there's a little bit of a hint that, Ash is probably really good at magic, and then that Vaughn is just a jack of all trades, but then you have characters like Balthier and Fran and even Penelo where you don't really know what their specialities are, and so when you're stuck with like speccing them in one direction or the other, it really is kind of like Rory was saying, like it gives you anxiety, like, well, am I going to spec the character correctly or not, because I don't feel like I know what their stat distribution is. I don't know what their deal is.
Anxiety is the perfect word for it. Like, and I don't feel anxious about a lot of things in a lot of games, especially. But here, I'm just kind of paralyzed by knowing that I could do something bad. It's very difficult to make this game unplayable. But for games like this,
it's very difficult.
But it's possible. And for me, I get really wishy-washy about the top 10% of like efficiency on stuff. Like, if I know I could be better if I just make the right choice, give me the option to go back and correct incorrect choices, and I would feel so much better about this game if I could, but it's just so tough. Like I would say for at least the old version of the game, the correct answer is no one's special at anything.
Yeah, and so
which is a whole
getting too precious about it is I just don't get precious about it. Like, hey, ultimately, the starting moves that any of these characters have, or the starting weapons that they have, that's convenient. That's cool that they've got these licenses, but every character can use every weapon. They could all be licensed for it, and the difference between their starting points is so insignificant that if at any point it becomes, important for a character to have a specific skill, I just direct them towards that skill and they have it. It leads to the characters feeling very samey. Like, there's no good reason for me. I mean, there are very few good reasons for me not to have every character have some amount of healing spells. Because they have MP, they should use it. And if you give them more spells, it makes them more efficient. I have only one character who doesn't have basic healing spells, and that's Bosch, because I'm being stubborn. Not because he shouldn't have them. It's because I'm just trying to beeline towards quickenings.
I mean, this is a game from a different age, obviously. 2006 when it came out. You look at stuff like Diablo 2 had no respecs. Diablo 3 did, in a way that made it very respectable. You could really do a lot of stuff from fight to fight. And I get the ideals of both of those things. Some people don't like some people feel like you should commit to stuff and not have any respecs at all, and that is a defensible idea. Do your research and get it right the first time. I've always felt like I don't mind being. I think a good kind of counter or center Path of Exile has a very dense, long skill tree. You get very few respec points, and if you really fuck up, you can't go back too far. But you do have the ability to take away some stuff that might feel a little less than optimal to you. And maybe there's a mod for this game on Steam that will let you do it. I should look into that, actually, because I would like this game way more if I could do that. But the fact that it doesn't bugs me just enough to the point where it's like you said, anxiety is the perfect word for it, and that might be.
The story that
be,
I always tell is that. Oh, you go ahead and finish.
I would say that might be that might be. Some people have very, very severe anxiety about things that are very important to them. And I don't mean to belittle that, but what I feel is perfectly. It makes no sense that I feel this way, but I do, and I can't help it.
And the story that I usually tell is when I was playing The Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, and I created an Argonian kind of soldier, basically heavy armor on a. Of course, like I didn't know what I was doing.
That is a perfect
Argonian,
example of a game
heavy armor.
You can fuck yourself up and not know it until 20 hours in.
Exactly. So I was an Argonian with heavy armor and swords, and I got to a troll that is easily beat if you have fire, and I didn't do any of the magic in that game, and so I was stuck getting my ass handed to me by a troll, and I was stuck 20, 30 hours into the game. Like, I'm the person who accidentally put points in Deus Ex on swimming, not realizing that it was completely useless.
I think Oblivion is one of the master classes of a game where you can screw up your character to the point where level scaling of the enemies will make the game impossible at level 20 if you haven't massaged the level up stuff. So in Oblivion, not to get way off the point, there are major skills, minor skills. The thing is, some of the stuff that you use every fight, you want to have a minor skill, because if it's a major skill, you'll level up too quickly. And it is baffling how that. Read my strategy guide. That one's still live on GameSpot. I spent 20 to 30 pages.
I used that guide because I kept getting stuck like 20 hours into that game.
That game is, oh man.
Then there were stats like athletics where you would level it up just by walking.
Jumping or walking, yeah. Or sneak was the ultimate one where you'd rubber band your controller and just hide in somebody's bedroom.
You would find the spots where people were sleeping, and you would just walk next to them until you could level up your sneak or stealth to max.
That game was.
I love that
and
game.
Now Final Fantasy XII.
That game was such a fucker.
Yeah.
Final Fantasy XII now looks good by comparison.
Yeah.
I just wanted to discuss some of the story stuff real quick.
We should power through it.
We really, like, we're only going to be talking up to the end of the heist. Like, you get into the heist, you have this section with Balthier. Him and Vaughn happen to end up in the same vault, basically, trying to steal the same object. And I think one of the main themes of this game, at least in the early part, is the idea of insurgency versus resistance and stealing versus reclaiming. So this game is a lot about it focuses a lot on the state of the people who are underneath this, I guess,
oppressive
colonial rule.
Yeah, I guess so.
This oppressive kind of colonial rule from a far-off, democratically elected power who is at war with this other major power and has put every country in between the two into a sort of pawns and puppet situation between these two larger warring powers. And, I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say that these themes in the year 2006 might have been relevant to some things that were going on in the world at the time.
Sure.
Perhaps.
But it's treated with all the tact and grace of a Final Fantasy game.
Yeah, but I would say that, like Final Fantasy VII, the Wutai section could not be any more based on Japan's experience post-World War II. I think that this game's major setup, where you are living in this oppressive like Rabanasta is a pseudo-Middle Eastern-looking country, right? You're in the middle of a desert. You've got all these large bazaars. You've got a lot of people with, you said yourself, Vaughn looks like Aladdin. There are a bunch of characters wearing garb that would not look that out of place in the Middle East. And you are under imperial rule of these kind of British-speaking others who are apparently democratically elected, have tremendous military might, and are kind of holding you as a puppet state in a larger conflict. Obviously the parallels to the Iraq War and, situations going on right around that time, I think are unmistakable. And I think it's an interesting commentary that the game is getting on in that section with this conflict between characters, Arcadians who want to describe the people who are fighting against them as insurgents and terrorists, and the people who you kind of ally yourself with, describing it as a resistance to reclaim Dalmasca to its rightful rulers. And even the act of Vaughn stealing objects from the royal palace, in his mind, he is reclaiming some objects that belong to the people anyway, and they should not be in the coffers of a foreign power.
Right.
Whereas he is arrested as a thief when he is caught. No one really cares about his rhetoric.
What are you talking about? I don't feel like I got that sense at all. I feel like, in fact, that all of these sequences were just tied together as set pieces of these ornate environments. But like, I felt like the story didn't do enough storytelling. That there's not enough kind of contextualizing of why Vaughn is doing this.
Well, he says he wants to take something back from the imperial power that's, holding them down.
And I feel like Vaughn doesn't have enough reasoning for doing that. Like, I don't feel like I empathized with why Vaughn feels like he wants to be a part of the resistance.
Well, at first he doesn't. He's just trying to steal this stuff to get back at the Empire who killed his parents and, has basically... He's running with a group of orphans who are working for the shopkeeper who's nice enough to give them tasks so they don't starve.
Maybe this is just my viewpoint as someone who doesn't know the light at the end of the tunnel, but again, I feel like...
This is not... I haven't played this game in forever. I don't know the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't remember all the twists and turns that this story is going to take. I'm just saying, in the first few hours, it's interesting, like Old Dalen and the differences between Low Town and High Town. You've got this kind of above ground section where there's a bunch of shops, there's, bars, there's Arcadians all over the place, and then there's Low Town, which is subterranean, almost Midgary sort of place, the lower section where there's a few shops, but mostly it's just slums underneath there. And basically there's this guy down there who knows everything that's going around in the city. He knows everything that everyone's doing, and he's actually kind of a locus of power in the resistance because he just knows everything because he's old and has been around a while. I like Rabanastre a lot. I think it's a great city. It's a shame that in the early game, there's not that much going on outside of these side quests and stuff, but I love how they set it up. Like, there are Arcadians who you will take missions from who want you to, hunt things down because they're a threat to Rabanastre because they care about the people who live there. And then there's other Arcadians who are like, they will insult you to your face and call you a cur and, a lowlife. And there's this just tension. Constant tension between the people who are being occupied and the occupiers. I think it's just a great setting, I don't think that the game necessarily does everything that they could with the setting, but it's a setting that I don't think has existed in a Final Fantasy game up until this point, other than maybe Lindblom when it's under occupation.
It feels like it feels like an MMO capital city. And I really, the development of this game is very bizarre. I believe the first lead developer had like a nervous breakdown, had to stop working on it, if I recall correctly. I know that happened to one of the FF games, but it was just, I'm sure, a long developed game. And I'm very curious how this and FF11, if being developed, I assume there's a lot of overlap on the development times for those two games. I could be entirely wrong about that, but it does feel like
right.
they're coming out at kind of there's a lot of pressure on 12. 11 was a hugely controversial choice to have a MMO being a mainline FF game. 12 coming out after that, like, what do we do after this huge game that's still being played now? FF11 is still very much alive, and 12 was...
and they're rebooting it.
Well, are they really? Because I know they rebooted.
Yeah, they're rebooting it for mobile now.
Oh,
Gino and I looked it up, but they're rebooting 11 for mobile phones. It's crazy.
Well,
yeah.
We're going to have to play that. Damn it.
12 is just one of those weird games where it really feels like it wants to be an MMO, and it works. Almost everything about this game works for me. The story is very epic and sweeping when you get to the end, and even a lot of the twists and turns along the way. The niggling things that I really that bug me out of proportion because they feel like a real speck on what is otherwise a really, really good FF game.
Yeah, and I feel like once you introduce characters who are not Vaughn and have them start articulating their positions within these conflicts, the game starts opening up, and we stopped just about at the point where people who aren't Vaughn start talking.
Yeah. There's the...
And that helps.
What do they first ask us to call Ash? Is Amalia?
Amalia.
Yeah, she has some pretty good moments when you meet her in the sewer, and there's nonverbal storytelling in that sewer sequence with Amalia, but we know that she's Ash. They're like, every time that Balthier looks at Ash and it's like, no, don't you say anything. Don't you break your cover. Don't you say anything right now. And then like every kind of like disgusted look that Fran and Balthier make towards Vaughn when he doesn't know who he's next to is just, mwah. That's like perfect nonverbal storytelling, and I'm so happy that it's there in this game.
Yeah.
The acted cutscenes too. Some of these, even the in-game in-engine cutscenes are very long. And speaking as somebody who worked on a game with a couple games with not perfect animation, the animation of those cutscenes are impeccable. Like, they did a lot of stage acting with their mocap performers. Or if it'd be even more impressive if it was all keyframe designed. There are some of these in-game cutscenes that are 10 or 15 minutes long with camera cuts between characters, very intimate kind of conversational moments that are not easy to do at all, and it's really, really impressive to see.
And very emotive, like the facial expressions on there, like what they get out of like even the slight movement of like the slight small touches, like when Balthier raises an eyebrow, you really get the sense that there's an emotional expression there rather than I never felt like this game was in the uncanny valley. And when we were playing Final Fantasy XIII, despite the fact that Final Fantasy XIII spent more money on its production values, I felt like
lived in the uncanny valley.
Almost every scene was in the uncanny valley.
These are robots talking to each other saying garbage.
Yeah, the faces haven't aged super well to me. Some of them look a little bit. It's definitely a game from 2006. The HD version of this is nobody's going to mistake this for a game that textures are old and everything like that.
Some of the textures are better than others in the Zodiac edition. I don't know who decided to retexture Vaughn's face in the Zodiac edition, but he has just
Does he have a clean face?
He has like a really like what looks like a spray on tan face.
It looks very bizarre.
Right.
It looks very bizarre, and like different parts of his body are shaded as like a tan, and other parts are just completely pale. He looks like a cheetah. And they got Gino. You'll get a good kick out of this.
So
he
looks like an Italian.
Yeah, they sprayed over his fake ass looking abs so that they don't look as horrible as your version of the game.
Look, just because he's jacked, just because he's spending all of his time doing errands for Magello and sit-ups, doesn't mean you should shame him.
Those abs in the original version of the game look like trash.
Are you just jealous of his?
Look, I'm a
Latin
skinny
abs?
guy that's not all that tall, but I looking at those screen caps of like what Vaughn looked like in Vanilla 12. But there are times when like I don't know if Rory you had this feeling, but like it feels like there's a lack of fidelity with like the audio quality sometimes. Sometimes like the remastered music sounds perfect, and then when it transitions to the old school dialogue, like you can tell that they're playing an audio clip from the original version of the game, and it feels like there's a lack of fidelity.
I can't say I've seen anything like that in an obvious way. But then again, I will confess that sometimes I play this game muted. With
that's totally fine.
TV on in the background when I'm just running around at 4X, murdering everything in my sight. I swear to God, I'm a single agent cause of extinction to a lot of species in this world because I've just been going through and I'm way overpowered for what I'm doing. The hunts are still very difficult, but it's kind of the way I prefer to play right now.
I mean, that makes sense. Like, even I'll tell you this: whatever they did to retexture. Playing on my PS2 on my HD TV, that looks worse.
So how are the load times
in the
good. PS2 version?
It's not bad.
Okay, cool.
The only issue I have with the game run-wise is some enemies have effects like ghosts. They will have effects just, existing in the world, like teleporty effects and shading around them. And when multiples of those characters are in view at the same time or in the level at the same time, it will chug.
Oh, okay.
Like, there was a fight I had against 3 ghosts, and I had 4 characters in my party, I think, at that point, 3 or 4, and the game just could not keep up.
Yeah.
It just I used a quickening to kill the ghosts, not because they were difficult, but because I was afraid it would crash the game.
You know, I really hate to do this to you guys, but I have somebody swinging by in a few minutes.
All right, then let's just call it.
Okay.
We can call it. We can come back to this.
So
I think we got to where we wanted to in the storyline stuff. It took me a while to remember the end of the heist. I'm a little bit further along, but
okay.
I definitely want to go back and research that not Gambit, but
the quickening system.
Quickening stuff because it's not well explained at all. And I might be totally misrepresenting what I think, but I need to go into some fights and get some missed points and try it out to see if we're on the same page. But
yeah, and Gino, maybe you can give me some pointers on the Gambit system. Maybe
will do. So why don't we go ahead and call it today? So that is the beginning of Final Fantasy XII. Thank you, Rorie, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to coming back.
ZP. Once
again. No problem. I'm always going to be here.
We will be doing some more. We'll figure a good endpoint. We'll let people know when we're going to stop for the next time. And reminder, if you want to get in touch with the show, at DeepListensPod, deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got comment sections, and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. Any feedback. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And until next time, peace!